The dog they tried to erase, he shouldn't have survived. Buried in snow, ribs showing. A tracker chip half burned into his flesh, the German shepherd stumbled across the tree line like a shadow from some forgotten war. No tags, no name. Only the black vest clinging to his back, stitched with code instead of letters. At first, the locals whispered about him, said he moved like he'd seen too much, slept with one eye open, never barked, never begged. Then, one night, he dragged a man out of a snowdrift, a man bleeding from the stomach, mumbling coordinates and names that no one was supposed to remember. That's when everything changed. Because the man had secrets, and the dog, he had scars that matched. The storm had teeth. Snow whipped across the clearing like blades of salt, hissing as it tore through dead pine branches and battered the metal siding of the outpost. Once a temporary ranger station, now little more than a skeleton of rotting wood and rusted hinges, the building groaned beneath the weight of snowdrifts crawling over its roof. A single lantern hook swung back and forth in the wind, its creaking the only sound that broke the silence of the dead. Haven lay curled at the base of the structure, half-sheltered beneath a collapsed overhang. His thick German shepherd coat, once black and gold with pride, was now matted with ice and grit, dulled by days of exposure. His breath came slow and shallow, each exhale a mist that dissolved before it could warm the air. He didn't shiver anymore. That part had stopped hours ago when the cold had seeped deep enough into the marrow to stop being pain and start being memory. His paws twitched now and then, not from cold, but from reflex. A flicker of a dream, maybe. Or something deeper, a final rehearsal of commands he had once followed without hesitation. Somewhere in the blizzard, a voice from the past seemed to rise with the wind. Out. The order had come not in a shout, but in a tone cold enough to split stone. It was the last word Haven heard before the steel door slammed shut behind him. No hand on the collar. No farewell. Just the sound of boots walking away. Then the engine, revving low like a heart in retreat. And after that, nothing. He had waited outside that door for hours that night, not out of confusion, but out of duty, waiting for a whistle, a call, anything. That was how war dogs were trained, not to understand why, but to obey until. But when the sun never rose behind the trees, when the snow began to fall and no scent lingered on the wind, something deeper than instinct cracked inside him. He wasn't sent away. He was discarded. Now his flank pressed to the frozen earth. Haven closed his eyes halfway, the way a soldier might scan the horizon with his last breath. His ear flicked weakly at the howl of a distant coyote, too far to matter. The sound held no threat, no order, no meaning, just noise in a world that had forgotten him. The tactical vest still clung to his frame, too tight now from months of disuse. The insignia on the side, barely legible, read, K9 Unit, H401 Alpha. Like a relic from another war, another life, another version of him that still believed the mission mattered. A gust of wind hit the side of the outpost hard, dislodging a sheet of snow from the roof. It thudded beside him, sending a soft tremor through the ground. Haven didn't flinch. Instead, he looked up slowly, and for a second, his eyes met the white sky through the swirl. And he remembered. He remembered Kandahar. He remembered the night the mission unraveled. It had started with one wrong order, a breach before confirmation. Hostile intel that turned out to be a family hiding from two sides of a war. Gunfire in the dark, shouting in 3 languages. Haven had moved in cleared rooms, protected the handler until someone yelled something from the back of the house. It was garbled, a phrase that sounded like a command. And just for a moment, just 1 second, Haven paused. And then everything shattered. His handler, Lieutenant Jason Ward, filed the after-action report. The K9 hesitated under fire, it read. Resulted in failure to neutralize. No mention of the false intel. No mention of the kid on the floor clutching a plastic doll mistaken for a device. Just the weight of blame, placed squarely on Haven. It didn't matter that Haven had saved Ward's life 3 times before that night. Didn't matter that he had taken shrapnel in the flank for him in Helmand Province, or found 3 wounded soldiers under rubble in Ghazni. One hesitation. One scapegoat. He was no longer hero, just liability. Now, the wind grew sharper. The sun, if it had risen at all, was already retreating behind iron-colored clouds. Haven exhaled again, this time slower. Not from exhaustion, not from defeat. Just the kind of breath one gives when they realize the world is going to move on, with or without them. The snow began to gather in his fur, each flake a silent eulogy. No bugle, no folded flag, no final pat on the head, just white silence and a tail that no longer wagged. The wind carried with it faint echoes now, phantom barks, the static of radios, the slam of Humvee doors. Or maybe not. Maybe it was just the forest settling into itself, trees snapping under weight. Or maybe something else moving in the dark. But Haven didn't rise. He had learned not to rise for ghosts. His body curled tighter, and his head rested between his paws, still alert barely, but allowing the weight of betrayal to settle where no bullet had ever landed. Somewhere deep in the Montana woods, under a shroud of snow and silence, a warrior was dying, quietly, not in glory, not in rage, but in the slow unraveling of trust and time. And yet, in the far edge of the wind, the faint scent of blood stirred the air. Not his, someone else's. His ear twitched once. Then again, the storm hadn't taken him yet. Not completely. Not tonight. The smell came first, burnt rubber, diesel, blood. Then came the sound. Not the disciplined staccato of training exercises, but something feral gunfire tangled with screams, radios barking over one another, boots pounding across rooftops and through alleyways. Chaos, thick and humid in the night air. It was Kandahar, or what was left of it. The mission had begun at 0200, a single compound marked in red on a blurred satellite photo. Suspected weapons cache. No civilians expected. Clearance granted. Infill fast. Extract faster. Lieutenant Jason Ward had reviewed the op with clinical calm. Standard sweep, he said to the unit. In, out, and the mutt leads. Haven stood at the front of the line as the team approached the outer wall, his vest snug across his ribs, black eyes scanning shadows like a radar. His breath was steady. He didn't know words like false intel or collateral damage. He only knew scent, tone, and trust. That night, everything smelled wrong. Not gunpowder or C4, but meat, soap, ash, children. He paused for a beat at the gate, his body rigid. Ward gave a soft whistle from behind the signal. Haven moved, scaling rubble into the outer courtyard. No alarms. No heat signatures on the first sweep. Then a voice shouted something from the dark. Foreign, masculine, panikted. Bayat brin, bayat brin. Farsi. Or Pashto. It didn't matter. Haven heard the word bearing go, a phrase often used by handlers in the field. He turned sharply. A shadow darted left. Another figure stood still. A third figure was small, kneeling. No gun, just plastic cradled to its chest. Then came the second voice. American. A soldier. Engage. But something inside Haven stalled. A second. No more. He had always moved on, reflex. Always obeyed. But the shouted command hadn't come from Ward. The tone wasn't right. It wasn't his handler. It wasn't the voice he was trained to follow. The hesitation cost everything. A shot rang out. Not from Haven. From a rooftop. One of theirs dropped shoulder hit. Another burst of fire lit up the night. Windows shattered. Women screamed. The little figure on the floor curled tighter around what he was holding, what turned out to be a doll in a blue dress. Then Ward yelled, furious, disoriented. "Dumb dog take it." But it was too late. The breach had turned into a slaughter. Conflicting orders. One squad retreated. Another held position. Haven leapt into the chaos anyway, taking down a figure armed near the far wall. Blood sprayed his muzzle, but no one saw that part. They only saw the pause. They only remembered the pause. Asterisk. 2 days later. The base smelled of bleach and heat. The debrief was silent. Haven sat leashed in the hallway outside the command room, the edge of his vest stained from the raid. Ward sat behind the glass, calm, jacket crisp. He didn't look at Haven once. The after-action report was short. Failure of engagement protocol. K9 Alpha H 401. Hesitated under direct threat scenario. resulting in compromised clearance and injury to unit member. That was all it took. No mention of the intel being bad. No mention of the family inside the compound. No admission that the cache had been moved days earlier. No recording of Haven taking a bullet through the flank, shielding a retreating corporal. Just the phrase, K9 hesitated. That word hesitated burned deeper than any wound ever could. Within 48 hours, Haven was off deployment. Within 72, he was tagged as non-redeployable. And within a week, he was on the truck. Asterisk. The memory came back to him in fragments as he lay curled beneath the outpost now. Snow tightening like a second skin. The blizzard had changed, but the cold felt the same. He could still hear the truck's engine humming over the mountain roads as they drove him west past barbed wire, past pine-covered cliffs, past whatever part of the world had once called him hero. They didn't sedate him, didn't pet him, just kept him caged in the back of the transport, beside old gear crates and silent black bags. When the vehicle finally stopped, the soldier Sergeant Miller, he remembered the name, opened the back, unclipped the crate door, and gave one word. Out. Oh. Haven stepped down onto ice-packed ground, and Miller shut the door. The taillights faded behind a curtain of falling snow. Haven chased the tire scent for a while. Hours. Miles. Maybe. But the wind took it. Like it took everything else. Eventually, he wandered back to the outpost, drawn by the faint scent of humans long gone, by the shape of shelter, by the way the pine needles leaned into the clearing, like soldiers bending under grief. That's where he had stayed. That's where he lay now. Not dead. Not yet. But not alive, in the way dogs are meant to be. Ears alert, tail wagging, heart open. He was the ghost of something once trusted, once called upon, once saluted, and now discarded like a broken tool, no longer worth repair. A crow landed on a branch above him and cawed once, the sound sharp against the wind. Haven didn't move. His ear twitched once. Then, in the distance just faint enough to be doubt, he caught it. A scent. Iron. Wounded. Human. Still warm. Not his. Not military. Not Ward. But something different. His paw flexed against the ice, and for the first time in weeks, Haven lifted his head. The mission had broken him. But instinct, it wasn't dead. The truck had long vanished by the time Haven turned back. He stood in the snow for hours after it left silent, motionless, his breath forming clouds that the wind refused to hold. Behind him, tire tracks had already begun to blur, each flake falling like a small erasure. Ahead of him, endless pine, a sky bruised with cold, and a silence too vast for any dog to break. No command to follow, no voice to answer. Just the echo of a door slamming shut. Out. That was the last thing they said to him. No name, no farewell. Not even a pat on the head, like the kind civilians gave him in airports. Just that single word, spat like trash being dumped. And Haven obeyed because that's what he was trained to do. Obey. Even when it no longer made sense. Even when it meant stepping into death. The place they dropped him was a shuttered forest facility. Faded signs. Chain-link fence barely standing. No guards. No lights. A skeleton of a base, once used for winter survival training, abandoned after funding cuts and a fire no one cleaned up. There were still scorch marks on the walls of the outpost, like handprints frozen in the act of trying to escape. They didn't even leave food. Only the vest. It sat folded on the concrete stoop, stiff with dried blood along the collar. His. The cereal patch had been ripped off. Nothing remained but the Velcro. Stripped, like everything else. Haven nosed it once, then turned his head away. That night, he didn't sleep. The blizzard came back hard, snapping branches, shaking shutters loose from their bolts. He curled under the rotted floorboards where the wind didn't bite as deeply, his ears twitching at every crack and groan. Inside his chest, something throbbed, not pain, not hunger. A phantom rhythm. As if waiting for the earpiece ping, the sharp whistle, the word, move. But it never came. The radio static in his mind was dead. The next morning he searched. Not out of hope, but instinct. He trotted down the frozen tire marks, nose low, ears pinned against the cold. Every few yards, he caught a trace. Exhaust. Oil. The faint human scent of the man who rode in the back sergeant. Miller, the one who opened the crate. He tracked until the scent was gone. Then farther still. But the wind kept stealing the trail, scattering it across the trees like ash. At one bend in the road, he stopped. He looked back, and then he sat down. No sound, no breath, just eyes. It was the way dogs wait at gates, at doorways, at empty porches long after their humans have gone. But there was no homecoming here, just snow, falling like indifference. So he turned around and returned to the outpost, because something in him refused to die in the open. The days blurred. The cold taught his body how to conserve. The silence taught him how to listen for nothing. Once, a fox passed through the edge of the clearing. Haven didn't chase. He didn't lift his head. The animal paused, nose twitching, then backed away slowly, as if recognizing something in him not entirely alive. The outpost became a shell he filled with breath. He patrolled it like he once did FOB rooftops in Helmand. A half-circle route. Slow, deliberate. He would pause at each window, scan the woods, then return to the stoop where his vest remained, unmoved. More than once, he dragged it under shelter just to keep it from being buried. Not because he needed it, but because it was the only thing that had ever been his, and they left it behind like a mistake they forgot to clean up. Sometimes, in sleep, he heard the others. Kilo, Blaze, Nova, the ones he trained beside, the ones who vanished after missions went dark. Haven never understood why their kennels stayed empty, why their names were scrubbed from the mission boards. He remembered Blaze whining one night in the transport cage beside his. Then, silence. Then, a new dog appeared the next morning, younger, unnamed. Now it made sense. Caleb hadn't told him yet. That would come later. But deep inside, Haven already knew. Project Helix, decommission, a polite word for disposal. On the 7th night, the storm broke for half a day. Sunlight filtered weakly through the trees, bouncing off icicles clinging to the outpost roof like teeth. Haven stood in the clearing, watching vapor rise from his own body, the way a soldier watches smoke drift from a rifle barrel after the last shot has been fired. He didn't know what he was waiting for. He just waited. Not for rescue, not for revenge. Something else. A permission to stop, a reason to rise, a sound, a smell, a sign, something alive. And that was when the wind shifted. It didn't come with noise or warning, just a scent, metallic and sharp, blood, fresh, and under it, a trace of something human. Not like Ward, not like Miller. This was different, off balance, wounded, still moving, still trying, still surviving. Haven turned his head toward the north tree line. His ears perked, his muscles tensed. He didn't know why he moved, but he did. And as he padded into the trees, snow clinging to the ridges of his spine, a question flickered in the silent place behind his eyes. If I wasn't discarded, was I chosen? He didn't have the answer yet. But the forest was calling, and for the first time since Kandahar, Haven answered. The wind had shifted again. It carried with it something unnatural, something Haven hadn't scented in weeks. Not prey, not cold, not the brittle sharpness of pine. Blood, not old blood, not memory. Fresh, warm, metallic, and beneath it, fear. The kind soaked into sweat, the kind that came from being hunted, not hurt. He lifted his head from where he lay in the hollow beneath the old cabin. Eyes narrowed against the wind's sting. His ears twitched, then stilled. No branches cracked, no boots stomped, but the air was no longer still. And there, riding the current, like a forgotten breath steal, the scent of forged metal. Carbon gun oil. Not rust, but readiness. Soldier scent. It made something inside him flinch, not in fear, in remembering. The tree line groaned as the cold shifted again. And then, through the blur of flurries, something moved. At first, it didn't look human. It crawled more than walked, bent sideways, as if one leg no longer knew how to carry weight. Wrapped in a parka too thin for the storm, a figure stumbled into the clearing, one glove missing. Blood spattered like ink across the snow behind him. His boots dragged. His left hand clutched his side, and even from a distance, Haven could see the red blooming through the coat like a slow, cruel flower. The man didn't see him, not yet. He was moving like someone trying not to fall before an audience of ghosts. His breath came in shudders, eyes darting toward the woods, not forward. He tripped once, caught himself on a snow-buried branch, then kept going. But the scent told Haven more than any image. Pain. Flesh split open near the liver, possibly shrapnel, but not old pain, not days ago. Recent, 30 minutes at most. Haven didn't move, didn't approach, didn't growl. He watched silent, low, the way he'd watched enemy combatants at checkpoints, waiting for the twitch of a hand or the wrong weight in a bag. And the man finally saw him. It wasn't a startle, not a jolt or a scream, just a halt, like recognition without words. He blinked once, took a single step back. Then his lips moved, a breath, barely audible. "You." The man knelt suddenly, knees buckling into the snow like the ground had punched him. One hand still pressed against his wound, the other bracing in the powder. "Don't," he rasped, eyes locked on Haven now. "Don't run." His voice was tired, hoarse, more gravel than sound. Haven didn't move, didn't blink. He stood in the stillness, ears forward, body poised. The wind shifted again, bringing more of the man's scent beneath the blood, beneath the exhaustion. Burnt plastic, gun oil, cordite, military, but old, faded, not active. Something else. The man slowly unzipped his coat with one hand, wincing as the motion tore at the gash across his gut. His breath caught, but he didn't stop. He reached into an inner pocket and pulled out something, a folded piece of black cloth. He opened it, shaking snow from the fabric. It was a unit patch, tattered but intact. 6th Joint Intel Group, Kandahar. The stitching caught the last light of day. "You were one of us," the man whispered barely above the wind. "Weren't you?" Haven's ears flattened slightly, not in threat, but in something close to memory. Kandahar. The word itself was a trigger. Dust, heat, screams in the headset, the low drone of the Black Hawk. The moment everything broke, the man coughed, then, wet, sudden, and sharp. Blood sprayed his glove. He gritted his teeth and fell forward, catching himself on both hands now, his side heaving. The snow beneath him turned dark. Haven took one step forward, then another, just enough to hear the man's heartbeat stutter, to smell the adrenaline spike in his sweat. He was fading, not fast, but sure, the kind of bleed that didn't scream, it whispered. The man looked up. His eyes were gray, not cold, but stormed over like a lake after a season of loss. And in them, there wasn't fear of the dog, only fatigue. "I'm not asking you to save me," he said softly, and something in his voice cracked not from pain, but truth. I didn't want to die alone." Haven didn't approach, but he didn't leave either. He stood like a sentinel in the snowfall, the space between them shrinking without steps. Then the wind brought something else. Not scent, sound, far-off boots, metal, radio static, human curses muffled by distance, trackers. Haven's eyes shifted, so did his body. The man saw it in him, instinct, that flicker of calculation behind the gold of his gaze. He turned his head too slowly. "They're still out there," he murmured. "Not after you, after me." The wind bit harder. The man tried to rise and failed, then tried again. He made it halfway up before his knees buckled again, and this time he didn't fight it. He just knelt. "Not asking you to carry me," he said, breath fogging. "But if you walk, maybe they won't shoot first." It wasn't a command. It wasn't even a request. It was an offering, a final bet made by a man who had run out of places to bleed. Haven turned his head. The forest yawned open behind them, thick with drifts, ghost paths, and old echoes. He knew the terrain now, knew which direction led to Deadfall, which toward the outpost ruins, which deeper into what the maps once called Black Hollow, where they wouldn't find them, where men with guns didn't go. He looked back at the man again. He didn't know the name. didn't know the rank, didn't care. What mattered was the choice. Not to obey, not to rescue, but to defy. Haven took a step toward him, then another. The man let out a breath he'd been holding since he fell, and Haven nudged his arm. Not rough, not commanding, just enough. Just so the man could lean, and together they limped into the deeper woods. Not friends, not a team. Just two broken things the storm hadn't yet taken. The cold didn't just bite, it crept. It slid beneath the skin, behind the ribs, under the eyes. It settled into the places people forgot they had until their breath slowed and their fingers stopped answering. Caleb Merrick knew that kind of cold. He had felt it once, years ago, in a ravine outside Mosul waiting for a pickup that never came. But this was different. This one didn't come from the sky or sand. This cold came from within. He collapsed again, near the tree line. A dull thud against the snow-packed earth. Blood soaked the inside of his coat now, pooling with every movement. A slow, internal betrayal. He didn't cry out. Not anymore. The pain had dulled into something else, something quieter than fear. And just a few feet away stood the dog, still, unmoving, watching, like judgment in flesh. Caleb didn't try to rise this time. He didn't have to anymore. He felt it. This was the line. Either he lived through the next few minutes, or he didn't. He turned his head slowly, neck stiff and trembling, eyes locking on the German shepherd. It had followed him, but not for him. Not yet. And now it stood there, paws firm in the snow, breath fogging like smoke from an old engine. Not growling, not approaching, just waiting, as if deciding. "I'm not your enemy," Caleb rasped, voice barely audible above the wind. "Not anymore." The dog didn't blink, didn't twitch, just stared. And something in that silence unraveled Caleb in a way. The wound hadn't. He coughed, wet, red, and tried to sit up, propping himself on one elbow. His hand slipped in the snow. He didn't try again. He looked at the shepherd, his eyes clouded with something between pain and memory. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" he whispered. "Men bleeding in the dirt, asking you to believe them." The wind howled in response. Still, the dog did not move. But Caleb saw something now, something beneath the ice on its fur, around its chest straps, faded nylon, scarred buckles, and there, just under the shoulder, a unit patch, partially torn, nearly buried in mud and soot, but still legible. Nov Tactical, U.S. Military Working Dog Unit, Haven. Caleb blinked. He knew that name, not from briefing books, from whispers. From people who used to sit in soundproof rooms and argue about whether a dog could know too much. He exhaled slowly. His voice dropped into something deeper now. Not pain, reverence. "You were one of us, weren't you?" Still, the shepherd didn't move. But there was a flicker, not in the eyes but in the body, barely noticeable. A shift in stance, a twitch of one ear, like a trigger pulling tension tight beneath the surface. Caleb continued, even as blood wet his teeth. "They said you went off script. That you didn't engage when they told you to. You didn't tear apart some man you knew wasn't guilty. And—" His breath shook. "They called it combat fatigue in the report. But I read between the lines. It wasn't fatigue. It was choice." That word choice, it fell into the snow like a stone into a frozen lake. The dog's breath hitched, almost imperceptibly. Caleb leaned his head back, his voice quieter now, lost between shivering and remembering. "They made you into a weapon," he said, "then punished you when you remembered how to be a soul." The wind swirled flakes across his boots. He didn't feel his fingers anymore. "But I'm not here to use you," he said, eyes fluttering. "I'm here because I found something. A file. A list. Dogs like you, handlers like me, we were liabilities the second we asked why." He paused, swallowed iron. "I came to find someone who could help expose it. Someone who knew from the inside. I didn't know you were real." A long silence followed. Haven didn't blink, didn't move, but the quiet was different now. No longer frozen, no longer indifferent. It trembled with something Caleb hadn't felt in years. Hope. He closed his eyes for a moment, unsure if he could open them again. "If you want to leave me here, I won't blame you," Caleb whispered. "God knows I helped build the system that left you. His voice cracked now, not from weakness, but grief. "I should have burned it all down the day I saw what we did to you." And then a whisper so soft it nearly didn't exist. "I'm sorry." A long breath passed, not his. The dog took a step forward, then another. No sound, no snarl, no tail wag, just weight in the snow. Caleb didn't dare move, not out of fear but reverence. The shepherd stopped just beside him and sat, not to guard, not to protect, but to witness. Caleb blinked back tears he didn't know he'd been holding. He shifted, barely, to reach into his coat. From the inside pocket he pulled a flash drive wrapped in weather-sealed tape. He held it out, trembling fingers, nearly slipping. "Everything's on here," he said. "Names, orders, Project Lazarus, what they did to your kind." He lowered it to the snow. Haven didn't sniff it, didn't touch it. But he didn't walk away either. For the first time in years, Caleb allowed himself a breath that didn't taste like lies. He tilted his head, resting it on the shepherd's flank. Not for comfort, but as confession. "I never got to say it," he whispered, "to any of you." His voice cracked again. "Thank you." And still, Haven stayed. In the middle of the storm, in the quiet that was not forgiveness, but something like it. And above them, snow began to fall slower, as if even the sky had paused to listen. The wind had changed. It didn't carry snow this time. It carried boots. Distant, rhythmic, wrong. Haven's ears twitched first, then flattened. He lifted his snout, eyes narrowing toward the northeast ridge. He didn't need to see them. His body had already cataloged the signatures. The metal snap of tactical belts, the staggered pace of human pursuit, the quiet clink of suppressed rifles brushing nylon straps. Trackers, hunters. He knew this sound, not just as a dog, but as a soldier. And soldiers didn't come this far north in a storm unless they had orders that couldn't wait, or witnesses to silence. Caleb Merrick hadn't moved in minutes. His breath had slowed. Blood still seeped from beneath the gauze strip he'd managed to wrap under his coat. He was pale, drenched in ice, melt. One eye, barely open, but alive. Barely. Haven stood over him now, snow coating his fur like frostbitten armor. His paws dug into the frozen earth, not in fear, but in memory. He had stood like this before, outside Mosul, outside Kandahar, outside names he never learned but never forgot. Hearing death coming, and choosing not to run because back then, someone had been worth staying for. Someone who never came back. Now, it was just this man, broken, gut-shot, breathing in stutters, who had said something that still echoed inside Haven's chest, like a warm coal in wet ash. "They made you into a weapon, then punished you when you remembered how to be." Absolutely. Below is the full approximately 1,000-word cinematic scene for "The wind changed first. Not its direction, but its shape. A new current moved through the trees. Sharper, angled, with a scent carried low to the ground. Boot oil, breath. Traces of gunmetal, wrapped in sweat." They were coming. Haven's ears twitched before even the distant crunch of snow betrayed their rhythm. He tilted his head slightly, nostrils flaring. Something in the tempo too synchronized, too clean. These weren't lost hikers or game wardens. These were men with intent, men who moved like he once had when orders had weight, and everything else, including mercy, could wait. He stood up fully now, his silhouette blending against the ash-gray snow. His paws shifted without sound. Not panic calculation. Distance to tree line. Direction of wind. Line of sight. Behind him, Caleb Merrick groaned softly, still sprawled near the half-melted drift. His face was pale, lips bluish. The blood had stopped pumping freely, but that wasn't a comfort. It only meant the body was conserving what little it had left. Haven turned, watched him. Still, a silence passed between them again, but this time, it was not a wall. It was a weighing. Haven had been trained to assess threats, but somewhere deeper, beneath the conditioning, there was something older instinct sharpened not by the drills of man, but by memory. A memory not of words, but of moments. The scent of a man in pain who did not raise a weapon. The tremor in a hand, not from malice, but from shame. Caleb Merrick was not a mission. He was a moment, a decision. And somewhere in the frozen dark, That decision flickered again, not with fury, but with fire. Duty? Survival? Neither. This was defiance. With a slow breath, Haven stepped forward, his paws pressing into the snow until they reached the limp body. Caleb's eyes fluttered, half open. He saw the dog above him and blinked as if unsure whether it was memory or mercy. Then, something unexpected happened. Haven leaned down and nudged him. Not hard, just enough for the man to shift. The shepherd growled low, guttural not in warning, but in urgency. A sound trained handlers knew. Move, now, or don't move again. Caleb coughed, grimaced, tried to sit. Another nudge. Another growl. Then, finally, a heave. He groaned, dragged himself up just far enough to lean onto the shepherd's shoulder. His hand trembled against the vest strap. The dog didn't shake him off. Haven moved forward slowly, testing Caleb's weight against his side. 1 step, 2. Caleb nearly buckled, but Haven stopped, waited, braced again. Then they moved. Not fast, not gracefully, but forward. They entered the denser part of the forest, the trees now twisted with age and wind, branches low enough to slice through breath. Behind them, the sound of men grew sharper. Radio clicks, the drag of fabric over bark. At least 3, maybe 5, and at least 1 dog. Haven could smell the uncertainty in its scent trail. It wasn't confident, wasn't leading. That bought them time. Snowflakes fluttered like ash in the fading light, sticking to Caleb's lashes, melting on Haven's scarred ear. Each footfall sank, then was swallowed again. No tracks lasted long in this storm, and still they moved, together. There was no path now, just instinct. Haven guided them toward a low ridge, one he had scouted alone many days before. During the hours he'd waited without purpose. It was a shallow dip near a frozen creek, flanked by boulders and deadfall, perfect to mask scent and break sightline. It had once been a refuge. Now it was a rebellion. As they approached the incline, Caleb stumbled again, nearly collapsing. Haven turned, pressed his body into the man's side. Caleb clung to the vest strap again like it was the last truth he could hold on to. "I don't know where you're taking me," Caleb muttered, "but I think it's further than I deserve." Haven didn't respond, but neither did he stop. Minutes blurred, then silence again. Not the silence of before. This one breathed. This one watched. They had reached the ridge. Caleb fell into the base of the hollow with a soft grunt, back pressed against a frost-bitten stump. He clutched his side, wheezing. His head dropped. "You didn't have to," he whispered. He looked at the dog now. Really looked. No longer as a shadow in the forest, or a ghost from a classified file, but as a being, not broken, not salvaged, but sovereign. "Whatever this is," he said, his voice cracking with ice and something deeper, "you didn't do it for me, did you?" The shepherd met his gaze, held it, then slowly sat down. Between Caleb and the sound of boots in the trees, it wasn't loyalty, not yet, but it was a line drawn, one paw at a time. Caleb exhaled, the pain in his chest subsiding just long enough for something else to fill the space. Awe. Awe that after all the betrayals, the burned names, the operations gone wrong, this creature still chose to act, to stand, to protect, not by command, but by choice. A quiet fell again over the clearing. Behind it, the storm thickened. The hunters would come. But now they would find something different waiting in the trees. Not a ghost, not a dog, but something they had forgotten how to fight. Conscience. The trees moved like ghosts. Or maybe it was just the wind bending the tops of the pines in slow, agonizing arcs, as if the forest itself could feel the weight of what was coming. Haven's paws dug deep into the snow, steady and precise, each step chosen with care. Behind him, Caleb stumbled forward, his breath coming out in jagged gasps, fogging the air before him. The wound in his side was pulsing again, warm blood soaking through the bandages and freezing at the edges. But he kept moving, because there was no going back, and no stopping. Not with the crack of gunfire rolling through the pines behind them like thunder made of metal. Pop, pop, silence. Then another burst. Short bursts, controlled, military. Haven didn't flinch at the sound. He just shifted direction, adjusting the angle of their path, not too steep, not too direct, always weaving, always watching the wind. His tail brushed against bushes now and then, leaving hair, not scent. It wasn't just instinct. It was tactic. He wasn't running from danger. He was outthinking it. Caleb slipped again, his knee hitting a buried root. He cursed, low and breathless. Haven turned back, eyes sharp. He didn't bark, didn't nudge, but waited. It was more cutting than words. "Get up." Caleb gritted his teeth and rose. "I'm trying, all right," he muttered. He wasn't sure if the dog understood English, but the look in those amber eyes said, "You don't get to quit. Not yet." They pushed deeper. The forest thickened. Pines closed in like sentries, their branches drooping with the weight of snow and time. Needles crackled underfoot, muffled by the wind. Caleb clutched his side tighter and followed Haven's lead, his boots leaving erratic prints the snow tried to swallow before others could follow. But they would. Caleb knew the type of men chasing them. He'd trained half of them, silent operators. No insignia, no conscience. Not field agents anymore, just tools wielded by something darker. He glanced up. Haven was already scanning a ridge, 2 steps ahead. Always. They stopped beneath an overhang of frost-laced branches. Haven circled once, sniffed the air, then pushed into a thicket just wide enough for a body. Caleb followed, crawling low, clutching his ribs. They emerged into a dip in the terrain, a kind of natural hollow, ringed by stone and moss. Haven sat, still, listening. Caleb collapsed beside him, panting. His hands trembled not from cold, from knowing too much. "How the hell did it come to this?" he whispered to no one. Haven didn't move, but Caleb looked over and saw the old tag half faded tucked beneath the dog's vest strap. E112 Kelvin, Haven. He nodded once, almost smiled. Fitting name for a dog saving someone like me. A crack in the branches above. Haven stood in a blink, ears pinned, body coiled. Not alarmed, calibrated. Then snap, boot step, 2 o'clock. Caleb ducked. Haven lunged forward, not at the threat, but past it, dragging Caleb behind the stone with his teeth gripped on the edge of Caleb's coat. A round ripped through the air, barked against stone. Too close. "Shh," Caleb hissed. The hunters had eyes now, and patience. They ran. No more stealth, just motion. The forest blurred, trees turning into streaks of vertical shadow. Haven darted left, weaving them through underbrush, pulling Caleb into sharper angles, doubling back where possible. Gunfire, again closer. The men were flanking. 2 up high, 1 down slope. Trap. Haven stopped, nostrils wide. Then moved again hard right, toward a clearing, then down an embankment slick with ice and pine needles. Caleb skidded, nearly fell, but the shepherd slowed to match his pace, guarding one flank. They hit a stream. Frozen in places, soft in others, Haven broke the ice with his paw. Just enough. Then walked them down the stream, masked the scent. It was textbook. It was what handlers taught, and what the military discarded. Minutes passed. Footsteps faded. They didn't stop. Only when the forest darkened into near night, when the wind covered even the sound of breath, did Haven slow. He turned, eyes scanning the ridge behind them. Nothing. Caleb slumped to his knees, pressing against the nearest trunk. "That's the worst cardio I've done since Fallujah." Haven stood still, watching. Then slowly stepped closer. Lowered his head. Pressed his snout briefly to Caleb's shoulder. Not with affection, but with something colder. Acknowledgement. You kept up. You lived. You're not useless yet. And for Caleb in that moment, it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about being seen by something that should have every reason not to care. The wind rose again, but for a moment, just a moment, the sound of boots was gone. And all that remained between the pines was the steady breath of a dying man. And a ghost with a purpose. The trees began to thin. Snow clung to the pines like aging breath, but the wind had shifted. Quieter now. The burn of cold still licked at Caleb's skin, but something had changed in the air, something less hostile. Haven stopped first, raised his head. ears perked forward. Then, without warning, he moved quick but not alarmed nose to the wind, paws pressing into old tracks nearly covered by frost. Caleb followed on aching legs, one hand pressed against the bleeding at his side, the other gripping the branch Haven had pulled from earlier for support. And then through a curtain of fog and dying light he saw it. A sloped roof, bark-covered logs, faint curls of smoke threading upward into the evening sky. A cabin. But not forgotten, not rotting, alive. Samson's lodge sat at the base of a slope like a memory someone had refused to let go of. Its beams were reinforced, windows covered with thick plastic sheeting. The wood pile beside it was fresh, cut clean, and stacked with military precision. A wire antenna poked from behind the chimney. Caleb's breath caught not from relief, from suspicion. He knew that setup, knew that kind of readiness. This wasn't a hunter's cabin. This was an outpost. And someone was watching. Haven paused at the tree line, tail stiff. He didn't bark, didn't advance. He waited. Then came the voice, calm, commanding. "I've got you in the scope, don't move." Caleb raised his hands slowly. "Name's Caleb Merrick. I'm not armed." Pause. A rustle. Footsteps on the porch. The creak of a wooden step, weighted by a large body. Then the door opened, and the silhouette of a man filled the frame. Tall, bearded, worn but unshaken. A soldier's presence never entirely sheds its shadow, and Jonah Calder wore his like an oath. He raised a brow. His eyes dropped, not to Caleb, but to the shape beside him, to Haven, and his face changed. "That's not a pet," Jonah said softly. He stepped forward. "That's a soldier." Inside, the cabin was warmer than it had any right to be. A wood stove crackled in the corner, casting soft light across the room. Maps hung on one wall, a rack of radios on another. On the far table, a scoped rifle lay beside a disassembled tactical vest still oiled. A woman emerged from the back, holding a steaming mug and a pistol holstered at her side. She was lean, graying at the temples, eyes sharp and assessing. Maeve Calder. Her eyes fell on Caleb's bandaged side. "Sit," she said, not unkindly. "Before you drop." Caleb slumped into a chair. The pain returned in full color now that warmth had entered the frame. Maeve set the mug down beside him, then crouched to look at the wound. "Who stitched you?" "I did." "Looks like it." She went to work without further comment. Jonah knelt across from Haven, who had not entered until now. The shepherd stood at the threshold, eyes tracking every motion, every hand. Jonah reached out slowly, not to touch, but to show his wrist. The band tattooed there was military grade. Unit insignia, K9 handler. "Yeah," Jonah murmured. "I thought so." He didn't say more, but the understanding between them needed no language. Just proximity. 2 soldiers. One upright, one on all fours. Both retired without being asked. "You look like hell," Maeve said as she cleaned Caleb's wound. "And you smell like guilt." "I earned both." Jonah pulled up a chair. "You got a name?" "Merrick. Caleb. Intel. Retired, sort of." "What are you doing with him?" He nodded toward Haven. "I didn't choose him. He chose to not let me die." "That's a first," Maeve muttered. Caleb hesitated, then gestured toward Haven's vest. "You recognize the insignia?" Jonah nodded. "Those dogs were off books. Ghost ops? Most never even got names, let alone a record." "Well," Caleb said, voice tightening, "he has a name. It's Haven." The room went quiet a beat. Then Jonah spoke, voice lower. "There's a list of dogs who didn't make it home. We kept it. A few of us. When Command burned the paper trail, we made another one." He turned to Haven. "You were E-112 Kelvin. You served in the Kandahar night raids. Hell, I read your name on a damn field commendation. They said you froze during a mission. But those of us who knew dogs really knew them. We always said it wasn't your fault. It was the intel. And someone upstairs wanted a scapegoat." Caleb flinched. But Haven stayed still. Only his eyes flickered. Jonah's gaze didn't soften. "They used him, then dumped him, just like the rest of us." Maeve finished tying the bandage. "So what are you running from?" "Not what?" Caleb said quietly. "Who?" He looked up. "I have evidence. About a program. One that neutralized its own assets once they saw too much. including dogs like Haven. They didn't retire him. They buried him. Alive. Jonah sat back. And you think just showing up here won't get us all killed? Caleb looked to Haven. I think he's the reason I'm not already dead. The storm whispered against the windows. Maeve poured a second mug and handed it to Jonah. You can stay the night, she said, almost reluctantly. But no guarantees after that. Jonah sipped. We'll see what the morning brings. And for the first time since the forest swallowed them whole, Caleb Merrick exhaled. Not in safety, but in something close. Something that felt a little like the edge of trust. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a war they wouldn't fight alone. The fire popped. A log split, sending a brief flurry of embers upward, glowing orange before dying into ash. Caleb didn't feel the heat. Not really. He lay stretched across a faded woolen cot near the hearth, his body trembling in waves that had little to do with the cold outside. His shirt was open, sweat pooling in the hollows of his collarbones. Maeve had done what she could, sterilized, stitched, stabilized, but the infection had already begun whispering at the edges of his consciousness. He mumbled something incoherent. Jonah sat beside him, checking his pulse again, one hand on the wrist, the other gripping the old field watch he hadn't taken off since Mosul. The rhythm under his fingers was weak, but steady. For now. Behind them, Haven paced, not with panic, but with precision. Every few minutes, the shepherd would pause by the window, head low, ears angled forward, nose twitching. Then he'd shift to the door, then the back corner, then circle again, watching, listening, waiting. But he never touched the bowl of venison and warm rice Maeve had left on a mat by the door. The scent lingered, familiar, comforting even. But Haven didn't eat. He hadn't earned it. Not yet. Jonah stood and stretched, joints cracking like wood under pressure. His back still ached in cold weather, and this kind of storm had the sting of Kandahar mornings buried in its wind. He looked toward Haven, who now stood rigid at the far window, tail still, posture tense. You can rest, Jonah said softly. Just not for too long. Haven didn't move, didn't even blink. Jonah gave a slow nod. I get it. Maeve sat across the room, sharpening a blade that hadn't seen combat in years, but still bore the weight of memory. Her eyes flicked toward Haven every so often, like someone trying to recall a face from an old unit photo. Why is he still awake? She asked, not looking up. Jonah lowered himself into the chair beside her. Maybe rest feels like a risk, or maybe he doesn't think he's allowed. They both went quiet at that. The storm outside had mellowed into a steady hush, snow brushing against the lodge like a hand across old stone. Inside, the fire crackled on. Caleb stirred. Haven! His voice was barely audible, raw like a throat scraped with rust. Jonah walked over. He's here. Caleb turned his head slightly, eyes glassy. They called him defective. Jonah crouched beside him. They lied. And in. Caleb nodded just once before, slipping back into sleep. An hour passed. Then another. Maeve had gone to bed, one eye half open. Jonah sat by the fire, rifle across his lap, boots still on. Haven remained by the window. And finally, slowly, he walked toward the bowl. He sniffed, then turned away. It wasn't just about hunger. It was trust, and the ache of memory. He curled beside the door, not inside the hearth's reach, but close enough to watch everyone breathe. Jonah glanced at him, then at Caleb, then back to the fire. This war didn't end, he muttered to no one. They just changed the rules. Outside, the night thickened, and somewhere in the trees, a branch snapped. Not broken by snow, but weight. Heaven's eyes opened. The soldier in him never really sleeps. He rose silent as a shadow and moved toward the window again. Jonah watched him, and, for the first time, didn't feel alone in the watching. The lodge smelled of coffee and gun oil. Dawn came slow that morning, bleeding through the frost-covered windows, like a wounded thing, weak and pale. Outside, the storm had settled into a white hush, too quiet for comfort. Inside, the fire had burned low, casting a soft amber against worn wood and weathered faces. Caleb sat at the table, a blanket draped around his shoulders, his body still stiff with fever and pain. But his eyes, those were sharp again, alert, haunted. Between him and Jonah lay a small USB drive, unassuming, scuffed on one edge, barely the size of a bullet casing. But it held the weight of graves. "Project Helix," Caleb said, his voice low. Jonah looked up. "Never heard of it." "You weren't supposed to." Caleb clicked open Maeve's battered old laptop. The screen flickered, word to life. This was red level, no paper trail, no exit code, just deletion. Haven lay near the door, tail still, head resting on his paws, but one ear twitched when the screen lit up. He didn't move closer, but he watched. Like he'd seen this before, like he knew. Maeve entered quietly, steaming mug in hand. She placed it beside Caleb and sat across from him. Her eyes flicked to the drive. "What's on it?" Caleb tapped a few keys. Files unfolded, video logs, internal memos, encrypted orders. He opened a document marked Helix, 9 Ampere Bravo. Lines of sterile language stared back. Subject classification: K9. Military, advanced tier. Final disposition: termination recommended post-operation. Justification: decline in behavioral efficacy post-conflict exposure. Logistics: disposal via non-traceable methods. Environmental abandonment preferred. Maeve stared. Disposal. "They called them equipment," Caleb said. "And when that equipment saw too much, remembered too well, or just got old, they disappeared them." Jonah clenched his jaw. "Disappeared," Caleb nodded. "Some were dumped overseas, some in country. Others, well, if no handler filed inquiry, they didn't even get names on a sheet." Maeve reached for the trackpad, scrolled. Her hand trembled when she paused on a grainy surveillance still. A German Shepherd, muzzle grate, eyes dim, vest torn. Subject: Shedham Hollow. Location: Granite Ridge. Disposal complete. She inhaled sharply. Her voice cracked. "That's her." Jonah looked over. "You sure?" Maeve nodded. "She had a nick in her left ear. Same side. She limped, just like that. We found her near the riverbed 3 winters ago, buried under frost, ribs poking through." Jonah's eyes darkened. "She survived for a while," Maeve added. "We named her Sage. Fed her by hand. Took her to that vet in Marrow Creek. She made it 14 months, Jonah said quietly. Then her kidneys failed. Toxic buildup from shrapnel they never bothered to remove. The room fell silent. Even the fire didn't crackle. Haven stood now. Walked over to the table. Not begging. Not intruding. Just being there. Caleb didn't look down, but his hand drifted without thinking and rested gently on the dog's back. Not to pet, just contact. "We trained them to run into gunfire," Caleb said, "to smell death and not flinch. But when they started showing fear, we called it malfunction." Jonah exhaled through his nose. Maeve closed the laptop. "Why now?" she asked. "Why bring this here?" "Because it's not over," Caleb said. "Someone's still cleaning house. Not just dogs, people. Anyone who knew. Anyone who saw." Jonah's voice was low. "You're the last." Caleb nodded. "Unless he talks." He looked at Haven. Haven didn't blink. Outside, wind kissed the window with a whisper. Jonah leaned back. "What do you need from us?" Caleb looked at them both. "Help me get this out." Maeve frowned. "To who?" "To anyone who'll listen." "Caleb," she said gently. "No one listens to ghosts." Caleb looked at Haven again. "Then maybe the dog has to speak louder." The storm had died to a whisper. Outside, the trees stood like sentinels, heavy with snow. Inside, the air held a strange stillness like the breath before memory breaks through. Maeve had gone to rest. Jonah sat cleaning his rifle in silence. And Haven sat beside the fire. Not close, just near enough for the warmth to reach him without touching. His eyes didn't close. He hadn't slept, not really. Just blinked long enough to slip into the gray space where memory and instinct blurred. The laptop sat open again, and it was speaking. Not with voice, with words, with names. Caleb was reading out loud, low and steady. like reading to someone who hadn't heard their own language in years. Unit K, 9 to 5. Phantom. Deployment. Fallujah, 2010. Record. 18 confirmed finds. Status. Terminated. 2012. File closed. A flicker in Haven's shoulders, Caleb continued, almost a whisper. Unit K, 9 to 7. Bravo. Assigned to Sergeant Lena Mercado, Yemen Corridor. Status. Behavioral deviation post, mortar strike. Reassigned for debrief. Final log. Redacted. Haven's ears shifted, lifted, then flattened again. His paw twitched once. Then again. The room was too warm for the way he suddenly trembled. K, 9 to 3. Juno. Handler. Lieutenant Felix Moran. Known for scent precision. Went missing post. Operation Thornlight. Entry ends. Unretrieved asset. That name hadn't been spoken in years. He had trained with Juno. She had one white paw. Always licked the side of her water bowl before drinking. She had saved a child in Syria by diving through a window seconds before a detonation. He remembered. And she was just a line now. A redacted file. A forgotten ghost. Caleb paused. The fire hissed as a log split down the middle. In that sharp crack of wood, something broke in Haven. He rose, walked slowly toward the table. Not to eat. Not to rest. He just stared at the screen. One name at a time, all gone. Dogs who had shared mud and fire and cold with him. Dogs who'd whined in sleep and fought with hearts bigger than the soldiers beside them. Dogs who, like him, had once believed someone would come back for them, and didn't. Caleb didn't say anything at first, just reached over and pulled up a faded photograph. It was low-res, grainy, 5 handlers, 5 dogs. A row of dusty smiles and wagging tails, somewhere outside Tikrit, 2013. Haven was second from the right. Young, fierce, head high. His handler had his hand resting on his vest. Lieutenant Jason Ward. The same man who wrote the report that ended Haven's career. Caleb tapped the screen gently. This was never about failure, he said. They just needed an endpoint. A place to cut the story short so no one had to ask what happened next. Haven looked at the picture, then turned away, walked to the edge of the room and lay down again. You weren't alone, Caleb said softly. Haven's ears twitched. You were just the last to make it out. No reply. Not even a growl. Just a long exhale. Like surrender. Like acceptance. Jonah finally looked up. He understands you. Caleb nodded. He understands truth. The older man's voice was tight. That's more than most people can take. Outside, wind brushed against the pane. But inside the room, one man and one dog sat in the hush between past and present, where names meant more than medals, and memory was the only grave they were allowed. The storm was their shield now. Thick snow pushed across the mountain basin in waves, quieting even the birds. The world had become pale, still like a page waiting to be written. But inside the hunting lodge, there was no calm. Only purpose. They had 18 hours. Maybe less. And everyone in that room knew the next dawn could bring fire. Maeve stood by the window, drawing thin X marks into the frost, with a gloved fingertip, a silent way to calculate angles. Jonah dragged a storage chest out from under the floorboards, not filled with winter blankets, but with scopes, claymores, tripwire, and a faded comms tablet wrapped in oilskin. Caleb knelt by the table, a folded map spread before him, shaking slightly from cold and blood loss. His lips were dry, but his voice held steady as he said, 3 approaches. North Ridge is too steep. South Trail is how we came up predictable. East Tree Line offers the most cover, but it's also where the wind shifts. Scent carries better there. He paused and looked to the one figure not holding a weapon or a plan. Haven. The dog stood still, ears alert, nose raised to the timber beams. Then, a subtle movement. A low growl from deep in the chest. He walked over to the window, glanced out into the white, and then padded toward the rear door, pausing beside a narrow gap in the frame where wind leaked in. Jonah followed. He's right, Jonah murmured. That's the blind spot. Caleb didn't smile, but he nodded just once. They worked in silence after that. Not out of fear, out of rhythm. The kind of rhythm soldiers fall into when time is short and death feels close but familiar. Maeve uncoiled copper wire and began stringing a perimeter net laced with bells and cans. Jonah positioned traps under the snow, not to kill, but to slow, to make whoever came hesitate. Even half a second buys time when bullets speak. And Caleb, he stayed inside, sorting gear with shaking fingers, redressing his wound. But all of them watched Haven. Not for orders, for instincts. He moved from room to room, nose skimming the floor, tail rigid. When he stopped near the fireplace and barked once, Maeve followed and found a cracked log panel that led to a crawl space beneath the floorboards. Perfect for fallback gear, perfect for hiding intel, perfect for survival. By the third hour, they had a system. Jonah knelt at the north edge of the clearing, looking through binoculars. Nothing yet, but someone's out there. The birds don't lie. Caleb laid down a second rifle near the back window. And Haven? He stood between them all. Not outside the circle anymore. Not an asset, not a leftover tool. A part of the team. Caleb was the first to break the silence. He hasn't stopped watching that tree line for 2 hours. Maeve looked up. He's listening to something we can't hear, then added quietly, "That's what they trained him for, and that's why they were afraid." At sunset, the world went gold and quiet. They gathered inside again, the map now covered in red pencil lines, markers showing fallback points, sniper lines, burn zones. Jonah looked to Haven, who sat by the door, still as stone. "I don't want to give him orders," Jonah said. "Not after what the brass did." Caleb leaned back against the wall. "You won't have to. He already knows what's coming." Jonah shook his head, half smiling. "He doesn't wait for permission. That's what makes him dangerous." And then, as if on cue, Haven stood, walked to the door, Saturday beside Caleb, and stared at him, not waiting, not begging, waiting to be included. For the first time since Kandahar, since the betrayal, someone didn't shout, or point, or yank a leash. Caleb reached out, placed his hand gently on Haven's shoulder. "You'll know what to do," he said. And Haven stayed there, silent, steady, not commanded, trusted. Outside, the wind howled louder. But inside the lodge, a new kind of stillness took root. Not dread, readiness. 3 soldiers and 1 dog, and the night ahead. The fire in the hearth cracked quietly. Outside, the snow had begun to lighten, drifting like breath across the timber-framed windows. It was that strange hour before dawn, when even the wind seemed too tired to stir. Maeve stood in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, silently chopping strips of dried venison. Her movements were practiced knife, press, slice, but her eyes weren't on the food. They kept glancing toward the shape lying near the stone hearth. The dog hadn't slept, not really, just kept his head low, ears half lifted, chest barely moving with each breath, like someone pretending to rest but still listening for danger. Jonah was asleep in the corner chair, one arm cradling a rifle across his lap, a blanket tossed over his boots. Caleb sat nearby at the table, pale under the eyes, his wound redressed with a tighter gauze wrap. He was tracing the map again, memorizing paths he might not live long enough to take. Maeve didn't look up when she asked it. Her voice was soft, but it landed with precision. "What's his name?" Caleb's pencil stilled mid-arc. He blinked slowly, as if the question had come from somewhere far away. "I don't know," he said after a moment. They called him R-214. Sometimes just Dog or Unit 4. Maeve turned off the stove, letting the silence fall again. She wiped her hands on a cloth, then crossed the room, lowering herself gently beside the dog's curled form. He opened one eye, didn't move, just watched her. There was no distrust in that gaze, but no invitation either. "He never said, huh?" Maeve murmured. Caleb exhaled through his nose, a tired kind of breath. He wasn't allowed to have one. That made her pause. She looked at the patch on his vest, the remnants of a call sign long since scratched out. The numbers barely legible. Like a tombstone no one visits. She reached out slowly, not to pet, not to claim, just to let her fingers rest near his paw, not quite touching. "Names matter," she whispered. "A number is something you file. A name is something you remember." The dog didn't flinch, didn't move away, but his breathing changed, a little deeper, a little slower, like something inside him was loosening, if only by a thread. Maeve glanced at Caleb, then turned her eyes back toward the dog. You've been hunted, burned, abandoned. You guarded men who forgot how to be human, and still you stayed loyal." Her voice was firm now, but gentle. "You deserve more than a serial number." She looked around the room. Snowlight pooled at the window edges, like quiet grace. "This place kept you alive. So did your instinct. But more than that, you chose to protect again, even after all they did." She looked down at the dog, this battered soldier made of muscle, frost, and memory. "So if no one gave you a name," she said quietly, "I will." She reached forward not to touch his head, but to place her hand gently on the floor beside his muzzle, an offering, a gesture. "I'm calling you Haven. M." The dog blinked once, then closed his eyes. Caleb's throat worked, but no sound came out. Jonah stirred behind them and murmured, "It fits." Asterisk. A few minutes passed in silence. Then Caleb spoke, his voice raspier than before, like something had come loose. He was trained to respond only to hand signals. They didn't want names. They said it created attachment. He looked over, eyes raw but clear. "But that's what saved my life. Not programming. Attachment." Maeve nodded, still watching the dog. "Then calling him Haven isn't a gift. It's the truth." Asterisk. Later, when Jonah rose to check the perimeter again and Caleb returned to tracing fallback paths, Maeve placed a strip of venison by the hearth. The dog didn't rush it. Didn't lunge. He waited until she stood up, and only then, slowly, did he inch forward and take the food in his mouth, careful not to leave crumbs. He looked up once, toward her, and though no one could say what passed between them, it was understood. He had accepted the name. That night, for the first time, he slept with both eyes closed. The sun hadn't fully broken the frost line, just a faint wash of color slipping through the black tree trunks, staining the snow the color of old parchment. Inside the lodge, the wood stove crackled low, its embers casting long shadows against the beams overhead. Jonah Calder knelt by the supply bench, laying out gear with the quiet routine of an old soldier. No wasted movement, no noise louder than the breath between motions. Maeve had already gone to gather more firewood. Caleb was asleep again, finally curled on the cot with a blanket pulled too tight, like it might hold him together a little longer. Haven sat near the doorway, still, unblinking, watching. Jonah paused. His eyes flicked toward the dog. There had been no growls these past 2 days. No teeth. No resistance, but also no approach. Like Haven had placed himself just inside the walls, but not yet inside the room. Jonah cleared his throat gently, not to break the silence, but to announce his presence. "Got something for you," he said, voice steady. He reached into the box beside him and carefully pulled out a tactical vest, not standard issue. This one was field modified, lined with weather-treated fleece inside. Lighter weight, built for endurance, not show. The kind of thing a man made when the dog beside him was more than just a tool. He set it down slowly, not too close. The German shepherd shifted, paws quiet against the floor, eyes moving but body still. Jonah didn't rush. He sat cross-legged, hands open. "I had a dog once," he said quietly. "Her name was Lark. She was my second shadow." He smiled a little, but the smile didn't reach the scar near his cheekbone. "She got me through Bolivia, Sudan, and a stint near Lake Balkash I still don't like remembering." He looked up at Haven. She wouldn't let anyone else put her gear on either. Not even Maeve. Just me. The dog's ears flicked. Jonah reached for the vest. Slowly, deliberately, no sudden motion. He laid it on the floor between them. "This one's yours, not theirs. No serial tag, no helix patch, just warmth. That's all." He waited. No command, no expectation. Just waited. It took a long moment. But Haven moved. Not quickly. Not with caution either. He stepped forward. Pause slow but unhesitant. Nose brushing over the vest, first left side, then right, then under the strap. Not sniffing for threat. Reading, like every stitch told him a story. Jonah stayed still, letting the dog decide. And then, with something so subtle most would miss it, Haven lowered his chest toward the vest, resting his front paws beside it. A sign of surrender? Number. A signal. "All right," Jonah said gently. "I'll fit it." He moved in, hands steady. He didn't reach over the head, didn't lift the paws. He shifted the vest beneath Haven, then slid the padded straps around the shoulders, clipped them loose slow, no noise, then cinched them not by strength, but with memory. He'd done this 1,000 times. And now, for someone else's soldier. When the last strap clicked into place, Jonah leaned back, not rising yet. He looked into Haven's eyes, deep, amber, alive with years no one had written down. "You decide when the leash goes on," he murmured. "Until then, you're free." Asterisk. The dog didn't look away. He didn't wag his tail. He didn't lick a hand or drop his head. But something shifted. A stillness inside him, long frozen, began to thaw. He stepped back once, felt the vest settle around his frame, snug, protective, familiar, and then turned to the door. Jonah stood up too. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything more. He just nodded once, a soldier's nod. And for the first time, Haven nodded back. Asterisk. Later, when Maeve returned, the first thing she saw was the dog near the woodpile, standing tall against the wind. Vest on, eyes calm, back turned toward the open woods. But not leaving. Not anymore. She looked at Jonah. He didn't explain. He just said quietly, "He accepted it." Maeve set the logs down, brushing snow from her sleeves. "Then we'll do the same." The fire crackled low in the hearth, its light flickering across the rough-hewn walls of the lodge. Outside, the storm's breath was quieter now, less of a scream, more of a whisper pressing against the windows. Snow slid from the roof in thick, muffled thuds. The forest beyond slept. Inside, no one spoke for a long time. Maeve sat by the stove, mending a torn glove with practiced fingers. Jonah had gone outside to check the perimeter, leaving just Caleb and the dog. And the heat between them, not from the fire, but from something deeper, something unresolved. Caleb sat hunched forward on a wooden bench, elbows braced on his knees, his breath ragged from more than just pain. The bandage at his side had soaked faintly through just a rust-colored stain, slow but steady. His right hand trembled faintly in the firelight. Across the room, Haven lay curled near the door, head on his paws, eyes open. Watching, not wary, not quite trusting either, but no longer distant. Caleb let out a breath. "You ever do something," he said quietly, voice dry, "that felt like the right call in the moment, and then you spend every day after knowing it wasn't?" His voice didn't aim at anyone in particular, but it landed squarely between them. Haven didn't move. "They told me it was just routing data," Caleb went on, "that I was building comms arrays to track K9 deployments, optimize rescue zones. That's what they said." He gave a small, bitter laugh cracked at the edges. "I didn't know, not at first, that what I was actually building was the framework to make dogs like you disappear." Haven's ears twitched. Almost imperceptibly. No court-martial, no retirement, just an end file, wiped clean. No one to ask where you went. Caleb leaned forward, hand pressed over his side as if holding something in that wanted to split open. "You know what made it worse? The system worked. It was elegant. One handler request in Kandahar gets rerouted through 2 dead VPNs, a ghost node in Jordan, then spits a kill switch order to a base in Alaska. And it all looks like routine logistics." He looked up for the first time. Not at the fire. At Haven. "And I built that." Silence fell again, broken only by the soft creak of wood contracting in the cold. Haven didn't blink. His gaze was steady, deep, but not cold, and not leaving. "When I found out what it was really doing," Caleb swallowed, "I tried to pull the logs, tried to trace back who signed the orders. That's when they came for me." He reached slowly into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a flash drive cracked along the plastic housing, scratched with grime and frost. "Everything I couldn't send is in here. Locations, rosters, unit ID. Dogs who were written off as accidents or transfers or retired early." He set it on the floor beside him, gently. "You're not the only one they did this to, M." And then, because maybe he didn't know how else to say it, he added in a whisper, "I'm sorry." The fire popped. Haven didn't move for a long time. Then, quiet as snow drifting from a branch, he rose. He didn't cross the room in haste or suspicion. He just walked forward. One step, then another, until he stood right before Caleb. The man froze, not in fear, in awe. Because Haven's breath was close, now warm against his hand, the shepherd's eyes searched his, not for threat, but for truth. And then, without any sound, The dog lowered himself to the floor, beside the bench. Not touching, but close. His body stretched out, his flank pressing lightly against Caleb's boot. Caleb didn't reach for him, didn't speak. He just let the weight of that quiet presence settle beside him like something sacred. And for the first time in days, his hands stopped shaking. Maeve looked up from her mending, watching the stillness. She didn't interrupt, didn't smile, just met Haven's eyes across the firelight and nodded. Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, a soldier and a builder of systems sat side by side, both broken in their own ways. But maybe, finally, not alone. The sensor tripped at 312. A faint click in the silent dark, barely more than a twitch of static from the battered transceiver Jonah had wired into the lodge's northern window frame. But to those who knew how to listen, it was enough. Jonah snapped awake on the cot near the hearth. Caleb stirred but didn't rise. Maeve had been reading by lamplight. She closed the worn novel without a word. Haven was already standing. He had been lying at the threshold, back to the fire, eyes to the door. He didn't need the sensor. He had scented it minutes before something shifting in the wind. A presence. Not the forest. Not animal. Something too clean. Synthetic. Man. Jonah crossed to the small terminal, eyes narrowing. North perimeter. One signal. Moving slow. Could be a scout. Could be bait. Haven stepped forward, silent. Jonah looked at him. There was no command, no leash. Just the way Haven shifted his weight steady, deliberate. A glance toward the door. Then a returned look at Jonah. An offer. "You want to go alone?" Jonah asked, his voice quiet. No bark, no tail wag. But Haven's eyes didn't waver. Caleb, still groggy with pain, but now sitting upright, said hoarsely, "He's not just going. He's volunteering." Jonah gave a single nod, then turned and moved toward the cabinet under the workbench. From it, he drew a compact thermal vest lined with storm mesh. He held it out, open-palmed. Haven stepped forward, lifted his foreleg, clipped in. Then the other. Straps fastened not with haste, but with reverence. "You don't owe us this," Jonah said as he checked the clasps. "But I think you know. It's not about that anymore." Maeve opened the door slowly, her other hand resting on her sidearm. Cold wind rushed in, thick with the scent of pine and melted ice, tinged with diesel. One long breath passed through Haven's flared nostrils. He stepped into the snow and vanished into the dark. The forest was quieter than before, less storm, more breath held. Haven moved low, fluid between the birch and pine. The moon was back now, high and sharp like a sentinel's blade. It cut through the trees in pale beams that cast long, skeletal shadows. He did not run. He stalked. His body remembered how to be invisible. His paws made no sound on the frost-slick earth. His mind returned to that strange clarity of the field, calculating, silent, deadly. There, 200 meters ahead. Movement, one figure, thermal signature, faint but human. Crouched, half hidden beneath a fallen spruce, scanning the terrain with infrared goggles. Rifle unslung but not raised. Still searching. A scout, recon detail. Haven stilled. Heart hammering not in fear but in the old rhythm. The one they taught him when he was still numbered, not named. This time, no handler's voice whispered in his ear. This time, no command forced his paw forward. It was his choice. He circled downwind, every muscle practiced, every decision his own. When the wind shifted, he dropped lower. When the scout moved again, carelessly snapping a twig underfoot, Haven was already within 20 paces. Closer now, he could smell him. Oil, gunmetal, sweat under synthetic fabric. But something else too, something colder than the air. No insignia, no rank patch. This wasn't a soldier. This was a contractor. Hired. Erased from accountability. And that meant others were close. The man paused, turned his head slightly. Haven didn't attack. Instead, he moved into full view, emerging from the tree line, like a shadow come to life. The man froze. Blink. Processing. What the? Too late. Haven charged not to maim, but to intercept. His body slammed against the scout's knees, sending the man sprawling into the snow. The rifle skittered away. Before the man could recover, Haven had one paw on his chest. and his teeth bared, growling low. Just enough pressure, just enough threat. The man choked out, "Good. Good dog." Haven snarled louder. Not because he was angry, because he remembered. He had snarled like this once before at another stranger. Back when orders were clear and betrayal wasn't yet learned. He released slowly, stepping off. Not because the man begged, because this wasn't the mission, not anymore. 10 minutes later, Haven returned to the lodge, alone. But behind him, far in the woods, a panicked voice whispered into a radio. "They've got a dog. Not one of ours. Something's wrong here." Haven padded inside, snow clinging to his fur, eyes sharp. Jonah met him at the door, read the look in an instant. "We've been made," he said grimly. Maeve was already loading supplies into her pack. Caleb reached for the drive, and Haven, without a word, sat by the fire, watching, waiting, knowing now this fight wasn't behind him. It had just arrived. Snow unbroken and silver under moonlight spread like a frozen sea between the lodge and the northern ridge. Somewhere on that white sheet, a single set of footprints had begun to arrow inward, cautious but relentless. Jonah tracked them in his scope from the attic window, breath held, pulse steady. Not a moose, not a hunter, a professional. He lowered the rifle and looked at the German shepherd sitting beside the hatch. Haven's ears were already locked toward the ridge. He'd scented the approach before the motion sensor ever blinked red. Jonah whispered, "Spotter, 2 o'clock dip. Can you take him quiet?" No command, just the question. Haven pivoted, claws silent on the planks, and slipped through the hatch into the night. Haven moved low beneath fir boughs glazed with ice. Old instincts guided each step. Keep wind at back, flank wide, close from the blind side. The intruder knelt 30 meters ahead, night optics raised, rifle resting on a tripod. Thermal lens swept the lodge facade, pausing on each window like a finger pressed against glass. Haven's nose twitched, diesel, metal, and something that made the fur along his spine lift. Aftershave, cedar tar soap, memory. He crept behind a snow-draped log, watching the man adjust the focus ring. When the intruder turned his head, moonlight caught the edge of his jaw. Square, scar beneath the left ear. Sergeant Nathan Miller. Images flashed, metal crate doors, taillights bleeding into whiteout. The order barked without eye contact. Out. Haven's chest rumbled. Not rage recognition. He slipped left, closing the gap until the scent filled his lungs. 9 meters. 7. 5. The tripod clicked. Miller exhaled, whispering into a throat mic. Visual confirmed. Cabin reinforced. 3 heat signatures inside weight. There might be. Haven launched. No snarl, no warning. A silent arc of fur and muscle. They hit the snow together, Miller's headset skittering off, his breath knocked away in a white plume. The rifle vanished into a drift. Haven's jaws locked on the man's forearm, precise pressure between bone and tendon. Training, not instinct, set the limit just shy of break. Miller's eyes bulged. He stared into the dog's amber gaze and saw the ghost he'd driven into the storm. "Jesus, Unit 4? You were supposed to be dead." The words steamed in the air. Haven's growl deepened, vibration rolling from throat to frozen earth. Miller thrashed for a sidearm that wasn't there. Haven tightened, teeth warning but not tearing. Snow churned beneath them, silence shattered by rapid breaths and the distant groan of trees. Okay, Miller hissed, pain cracking his voice. "Easy, mutt. I'm not here to shoot a dog." But Haven remembered the metal crate, the slammed door, the engine fading. He pressed harder. Footsteps crunched behind them, slow, measured. Jonah emerged from the dark, rifle leveled, but finger clear of the trigger guard. "Hands where you can see 'em, Sergeant." Miller froze, gloved palms rising. Haven's grip eased just enough to let blood flow without ripping cloth. Jonah looped a zip tie around Miller's wrist, then the other, nodding at Haven. "Good work, soldier." Haven released, stepping back but keeping teeth bared. A low rumble still simmering. Miller spat snow. "You have no idea what you're messing with. Ellis will glass this whole mountain." Jonah hauled him to his feet. "Ellis sent you to finish what the blizzard didn't." He patted the man down. Radio, flare, suppressed sidearm. Everything clattered into the snow. "Looks like you failed twice." Miller glanced at Haven, fear-fighting disbelief. They said dogs can't hold grudges. Jonah gripped the back of Miller's collar. They lied about more than that. Move. They started toward the lodge, Jonah steering the prisoner, Haven flanking, silent sentinel moonlight carving their shadows long against the drifts. Halfway back, Miller muttered, "You won't kill me. You'll want intel." Jonah replied, calm as frost. "He decides whether you reach the door in one piece." Haven strode beside them, breath billowing, scarred ear twitching at every forest creak. He did not look at Miller again. He had already chosen restraint, a harder victory than fury. Maeve opened the door as they approached, flashlight steady on the trio. Caleb, pale but upright, braced the frame, pistol lowered but ready, his gaze fixed on the sergeant, then shifted to Haven, recognition dawning. Miller sneered at Caleb. "Traitor." Caleb's voice was tired steel. "I'm done following orders that bury friends four-legged or two." Inside, Jonah sat Miller on a chair, zip ties cinched to a radiator pipe. Maeve confiscated a second comm bead from his bootlace, tossing it into the stove where it hissed and cracked. The room fell quiet except for popping cedar. Haven padded to the hearth, lay down body between prisoner and fire, eyes never closing. Miller swallowed, finally understanding the hierarchy. Dog first, survivor second. He was cargo. Snow rattled the windows. Outside, the forest held its breath. Caleb met Haven's gaze, offering a faint nod of gratitude. Haven didn't move, but the growl had faded, replaced by a silence that carried the weight of spared judgment. Tonight, mercy was measured in restraint. Tomorrow, it might be measured in survival. And for the first time since the crate door had slammed shut, Haven chose what not to destroy. The wood stove hissed, devouring the last of the cedar Maeve had thrown in. Gray heat rippled across the lodge's main room, but no one felt warm. Sergeant Nathan Miller sat zip-tied to the cast-iron radiator, wrists white around the plastic cuffs. Sweat beaded beneath his snow-caked hair. The temperature in the cabin hovered just above freezing, yet his jaw worked like a man in midsummer. Eyes tracked everything. The windows, the door, the rifles leaning against a beam, then slid, uneasily, to the dog stretched out 3 feet away. Haven lay sphinx-like, head on paws, amber gaze fixed on the prisoner. No growl now, just the kind of stillness that reminded a man how thin skin feels. Jonah folded his arms, leaning against the table. Caleb sat opposite Miller, a cracked mug of coffee between his hands. Maeve stood behind Caleb, arms loose, sidearm holstered but unsnapped. Jonah broke the silence first. "Call sign, unit. And who's marching on my mountain?" Miller snorted. "You think I'm giving you—" Haven's ears flicked forward, no sound. Just a shift in posture. Miller's voice faltered. He coughed, looked away. Caleb spoke, voice low but threaded with iron. "Ellis won't extract you, Nate." Miller's head jerked up. "Bull." "Radio's dead." Caleb cut in. "Your GPS ping never hit. You're a ghost asset burnable by design." He slid the comm bead they'd pulled from Miller's boot across the table. Its casing was blistered from the stove's heat. "They wrote you off the second that dog took you down." Maeve leaned closer, expression unreadable. "We've seen their files. They do it to war dogs. They'll do it to you." For the first time, uncertainty seeped into Miller's eyes. Jonah pushed off the table. "Let's try again. Approach vector. Head count. Gear." Miller's lips compressed. "Even if that were true, Ellis doesn't leave loose ends." "Exactly." Caleb's voice fell to a whisper. "Which means unless you talk, he'll torch this place with you cuffed inside." Miller's gaze flicked to the stove, the oil lamps, the stacked propane near the back wall. Sweat rolled down his temple. Haven rose slowly, silent, deliberate, closing the gap until his breath fogged against Miller's knee. The dog didn't bare teeth, just stared, closer than before. Miller tried to edge back. The cuffs bit into his skin. Jonah's tone softened, almost companionable. "You dragged that crate door shut on him, didn't you?" Miller looked at Haven, swallowed. "Orders." "How'd that loyalty taste when the door slammed on you tonight?" Silence. Caleb sipped coffee, wincing at the pull on his stitches. Then he set the mug down. "You want a way out? Give us the timeline." Miller's shoulders sagged an exhale, part fear, part resignation. "Full strike team moves at 4:45. Twilight gives them silhouette advantage." Jonah nodded once. "How many?" 8 shooters. 1 tech. Thermal, suppressors, subsonic rounds. They're bringing a dog, Malinois, named Riot. Haven's ears twitched again, barely. Caleb pressed. Fallback? Miller's eyes slipped shut. If Resistance stalls mission beyond 20 minutes, Ellis initiates Cinder Protocol. Thermite charges planted on approach. They'll ignite the cabin, burn evidence, dump coordinates as training accident. He opened his eyes, voice brittle. No survivors slated for recovery. Not even me. Maeve's jaw tightened. Gear list? SIG MCX rifles, integrally suppressed. Subguns for interior sweep. 2 breaching shotguns. Tech carries counter. UAV jammer. Drone recon. 1 satchel thermite. 1 canister white phosphorus for failsafe. M. Jonah exchanged a glance, with Maeve calculations passing without words. Entry routes? Split assault. 3 south, 2 east, 2 west. 1 overwatch on the ridge was supposed to be me. His laugh was hollow. Guest spotter slots open. Haven finally stepped back, settling beside Caleb's chair. The movement wasn't threat, it was verdict. Interrogation accomplished. Caleb leaned forward, voice softer. Nate, you've given us a chance. That's better than what Ellis ever offered you. Miller's throat worked. You still won't make it. Jonah checked his watch, 3:44. We'll see. He turned, began unloading gear. Extra magazines, smoke grenades, the spare thermal cloak. Maeve moved to secure vantage points, shoes crunching softly on plank floor. Caleb rose with effort, pain etched across his features, but determination burning through. He looked at Haven. Time to move the board. The dog met his gaze steady, calm, and padded toward the back door, as if he'd already plotted every shadow in the coming fight. Behind them, Miller slumped against the radiator, eyes following Haven with something like wonder and regret. Out in the tree line, the wind shifted. 4 minutes until 4 o'clock, 18 until approach. Enough for broken things, man, woman, and war-scarred dog to decide what survives the dawn. The lodge hummed like a heart under strain. Batteries whined, generators throbbed. The comm, tablet's cracked screen, blinking link pending. Caleb hunched over the dining table, now an improvised comms desk, his fingers skittering across keys, while a wire-wrapped antenna slanted out the kitchen window into the frozen dark. A countdown pulsed red in the corner of the screen. 3 o'clock, 2:59. 3 minutes until the satellite arced high enough for a clean burst transmission. 1 slender window before clouds reclaimed the sky, and Ellis's men eclipsed everything. Caleb's pulse tried to match the timer. Sweat prickled beneath layers of flannel and gauze. Every breath tugged at the stitches in his side, turning urgency into pain. He pushed it down, opening the encrypted folder. Images flared. Manifest logs, euthanasia orders, dog tags with no graves. Send. All of it. Near the front window, Haven stood statue still, muzzle inches from the glass, ears rotating like twin radar dishes. The moon had drowned behind a rag of clouds, but his eyes carved shapes from black, trunks, snowdrifts, and something else movement. Low, deliberate, ghosting through the timberline. Jonah drifted between Caleb and the rear door, checking claymore triggers, tightening wire. Maeve knelt at the stove, coaxing a low flame enough heat to keep Caleb's laptop above freezing, not enough brightness to silhouette them. Miller, still cuffed to the radiator, watched silently, face drawn, regret pooling in the hollows of his eyes. Static hissed from the external modem. Green bars flickered, dipped, crawled back. The storm wasn't gone, just sleeping, and its leftover ice made the stratosphere pulse with noise. Caleb muttered a prayer to old satellites and aging code. Behind him, the shepherd shifted, weight sliding forward a centimeter. Movement confirmed, Jonah noticed. Eyes on? He asked, voice a dry leaf. Haven didn't bark, just a low rumble, yes. Maeve killed the stove flame. Darkness reclaimed the room, broken only by laptop glow. Caleb routed power from every spare battery, fingers trembling as he toggled redundancy. A red error flashed. Packet loss detected. He stifled a curse, leaned closer, breath misting the screen. A soft thunk on the roof, snow dislodged or boot. Heaven's head tilted. Another thunk farther east. Boots. Jonah's rifle rose to his shoulder. He slid to the window opposite Haven, muzzle dark against darker glass. Outside, shapes flickered, men in winter camo, slipping between trees. Haven's hackles lifted like frost-coated wire. He glanced back once. Permission? Jonah's nod was microscopic but clear. Hold. Protect the upload. Signal bars dipped again. Caleb's heart slammed. Come on, come on! He keyed a manual resend, packet fragments stitching across a frayed digital vein. Maeve snapped a glow stick, cracked it under a dish towel, just enough chem light to find the spare antenna coil. She whispered, "Backup plan?" Caleb nodded without looking, sweat carving cold lines down his spine. A pop-outside suppressed rifle? No, a branch under weight. Haven bristled, nose wrinkling. He inched sideways, tail rigid, eyes never leaving the vapor of breath beyond the pain. Jonah whispered into the dark, "South flank, 2 heads, maybe 3. They're waiting for green light." Maeve slipped to the stairwell, threw a blanket over the attic trap masking heat signature. Miller flinched as Haven passed within inches, the dog's silent energy louder than any threat. Caleb's screen flashed amber, uplink acquired. A progress ring crawled. 10%. 12. 15. He forced his breathing to match the rise. Outside, crunches in the snow grew bolder, 15 meters, closing. Haven's world narrowed to that sound. Each step told him weight, gear, intent. These men walked like owners of the night, but their pulse he could smell. It was fast. They feared what they couldn't see inside these logs' walls. 38%. 43. Caleb wiped a sleeve across his brow. Another. Dropped packet. Rebuilding. Jonah clicked the safety off. If they breach before 70, we lose proof. He didn't need to say what happened after. Maeve slid a claymore detonator into Caleb's reach. "If we have to burn the place, you trigger, we run north." Caleb nodded, eyes locked on percentages. Haven's gaze snapped left roof again, above Caleb's corner. A distinct crunch. He growled, deep, thunder in a cave. Caleb's fingers froze. Jonah hissed, "Hold steady." Outside, a soft scrape of metal on wood hooking a climbing pick. The roof overwatch spotter was repositioning, seeking sightline to the window glow. 68%. Maeve whispered, "Almost." Caleb's lip bled where he bit it. The modem light stuttered green, red, green. A boot heel struck the roof's edge. Snow sloughed off, hammered the porch. Haven launched from stillness to power into the entry hallway. Jonah wheeled, rifle following as the dog vanished into dark. A dull thud above. Yell cut short. Then, nothing. Haven reappeared 10 seconds later. Breath even, a smear of snow across his vest. He returned to the window, resumed the vigil. No one asked. They knew. 79%. 84. Caleb's vision tunneled around the numbers. Outside, footsteps hesitated, uncertainty rippling through the line. Their Overwatch channel had gone silent. Maeve touched Jonah's arm. "Stand by." 96. Signal flicker. 97. Packet loss. Buffering. Haven's head whipped right. A flare of motion between trees, one operator raising a suppressed rifle toward Maeve's dark silhouette. Jonah fired first, one controlled burst through the window pane. The man crumpled, snow coughing upward like white flame. Glass rained. Miller flinched against the radiator. Caleb didn't look up. 99. Upload complete. Transfer verified blinked green. Caleb sagged back, lungs empty. "It's out," Maeve breathed. "Then so are we." Jonah yanked the SAT drive free, shoved it in Caleb's pocket. He slammed the laptop closed, cut power. Haven left the window, moving to rear exit position, eyes blazing. Outside, shouts Ellis's men reacting, regrouping. The siege no longer covert. Maeve flicked off the room's lantern. Darkness fell, except for embers in the stove and the slow pulse of Haven's breath. 3 minutes had saved the truth. Now they had to save themselves. The modem light died. Just blink gone, plunging Caleb's world into darkness save for the laptop's wan glow and the pulsing ache in his ribs. A second earlier, the transfer bar had climbed to 87%, clawing upward through static and failing satellites. Now the cabin's generator stuttered like an old man coughing blood. Every bulb flickered, shadows dancing over log walls. Outside, the night cracked pop-pop-pop rifle fire somewhere downslope. Return fire spat from Jonah's window position, a harsher bark that split the hush of snow. Glass rained onto pine needles. Wind sucked powder through the jagged hole, hissing across the floorboards like a warning. Caleb tasted iron. He touched his side and felt warmth spread beneath the bandage. Stitches torn again, too much, twisting over the keyboard, too much time since the last dose of antibiotics. A blooming red soaked through gauze, drip onto the map-littered table. Maeve whirled from the wood stove, eyes narrowing on the dark modem. Generator line or jammer? Both. Caleb's voice rasped, thick with pain. Ellis must have clipped the feed. He jabbed trembling keys, rerouting to battery. The Wi-Fi beacon coughed back to life, one fragile bar. Progress resumed, creeping like a wounded thing. 87.1. 87.2. Another gun crack outside closer. Maeve drew her pistol, crossed to Caleb, placing her body between him and the southern wall. "Keep typing," she said, voice low and absolute. "Whatever happens, that file leaves this cabin." She popped a fresh mag, chambered around, eyes on the dark window slit. Across the room, Jonah slammed a fresh magazine home. "South approach, 2 tangos down, but they're probing," he called. "Haven door." The German Shepherd was already there, vest gleaming dully in lantern light, muscles taut. He planted front paws against the doorframe, nose twitching at the seam, reading every vibration skimming through pine boards. Another suppressed shot thudded into the exterior wall. Wood splintered above Haven's head. He didn't flinch, only pivoted to ensure Caleb remained in sight, then back to the dark. 87.8, 88.0. Caleb's hands shook harder, blood loss turning letters blurry. He clenched his teeth, willed focus. Just 12% more. 27 megabytes. Hold. The generator sputtered again. Off. On. Off. Lanterns flickered, threatening blackness. Maeve tossed Jonah a length of paracord. "Fuel line shot. We'll have to hand crank the backup if they kill main power." Jonah nodded, never lifting his eye from the scope. "Copy! Haven! With me!" A whistle soft, rising then cut. Haven spun to him, silent question. Jonah pointed 2 fingers at the floor beside the southern door, then tapped his own chest. Dual hold. Haven took position. Left flank, jaws parted just enough to show ivory. Through the blown-out pane, Jonah glimpsed silhouettes weaving through trees, ghosts in winter camo. A flash strobe popped, painting trunks blue-white. He fired once. A grunt. A body fell. Haven's throat rumbled. Jonah felt it through floor vibrations more than sound. 89.3, 89.7, 90.1. Caleb's vision tunneled. He yanked duct tape from a roll, pressed it over the damp gauze crude tourniquet. Keys clacked slower now, but still. A red icon warned battery critical 7%. He cursed under his breath. Maeve darted to the supply shelf, grabbed the hand-crank dynamo, plugged its cable into the inverter, and started turning. The light steadied. Modem LED flicked green again. Caleb exhaled, returning to the keys. Outside, a low, whoosh smoke grenade arced, bounced off porch rail, hissed gray plumes into the doorway crack. Haven sneezed, eyes watering, but held. Jonah dropped low, flicked his rifle's IR laser on, painting red dots through haze. He squeezed off 2 shots. Retaliation roars muffled into the snow. Movement right, another figure flanking. Haven lunged through the opening before Jonah fired, jaws latching onto fabric and flesh. A muffled shriek cut through the hiss. Haven dragged the man inside the cloud out of Jonah's lane, then released and snapped back behind the door, silent as he'd gone. Maeve's arms blurred on the crank rhythm steady, her breath plumed, sweat shining on her temples. 92.4, 93.0, 93.6. Caleb's heart hammered. Each percent felt like a mile climbed with a dagger in his ribs. He whispered numbers, a mantra. 94. 95. A sudden boom from the east wall shook the cabin breaching charge on the window shutter, but it held. Splinters rained. Jonah barked, "Fall back corner!" Maeve abandoned the crank, dove across Caleb to intercept. Haven bounded to the shattered shutter as a gloved hand reached through. He clamped down, dragged the arm sideways across jagged wood. A scream faded into the night. Caleb forced himself not to look, eyes on progress bar. 96.1. 96.9. Generator coughed, surged, then died completely. Lanterns winked out. Only laptop glow remained an island in ink. Maeve swung her pistol to cover Jonah as he primed a smoke round and lobbed it through the broken pane. Thick white filled the breach, masking silhouettes. Battery warning flashed red again, 3%. Caleb's breath hitched. He whispered, Come on, come on. Tizinch en Afen Stein. Tizinch en Afen. Tizinch Neinfen Afen. A second breach charge boomed, this time at north window. Glass exploded inward. Splinters clipped Caleb's shoulder. Haven pivoted instantly, covering the new opening. Growl rumbling like a brewing storm. Jonah fired at muzzle flashes. Maeve reloaded one. Handed. Eyes never leaving the smoky breach. 99.6. Battery icon pulsed red. Outside silence. A lull. Enemy regrouping. Haven's snarl softened. He glanced over at Caleb, anxious, as if the dog understood seconds mattered. Caleb stared at the screen. 100% transfer complete. A tiny chime pinged. Caleb collapsed against the chair back, laugh breaking into a cough. "It's gone. Files out." Maeve exhaled, almost a sob of relief. She grabbed the modem cord, yanked it free, crushed it under her boot. Jonah shouted, "Breach plan'll change fallback to cellar." "On you." Maeve slung Caleb's arm over her shoulder. Haven backed through the smoke, guarding. Jonah ripped a flare from his vest, snapped at green light bloom. He tossed it into the main room's corner, where propane tanks waited. As the four of them half ran, half stumbled toward the trapdoor, the flare hissed brighter. Behind them, truth had left the mountain. Now fire would erase their footprints. Haven dropped into the cellar last, teeth shining in emerald light, eyes fixed on the stairwell above. Whatever waited next, he'd face it beside them, no leash needed. They reached the cellar ladder just as the flare upstairs fizzled into darkness, leaving only the tremor of distant gunshots and the hammer beat of their own hearts. Maeve guided Caleb onto a storage crate, rechecking the bandage on his side. Jonah slammed the hatch, dropped the iron bar across it. Haven paced once along the earthen wall, nostrils flaring, taking a census of every crack that bled winter air. Then the world blinked. A silent flash brighter than daylight bloomed above them. The concrete floor shivered. Dust rained from ceiling joists. It lasted less than a heartbeat. It ended forever. Every light in the cellar died. Lanterns, tack flash, glow bracelets, snuffed. Jonas's earpiece crackled once, then fell mute. Even Maeve's watch, a trustworthy relic of quartz and combat, froze at 4:57. Emp. A hammer of invisible lightning had just swept the mountain. Jonah cursed under his breath. "Backup batteries?" "Fried," Maeve answered, patting the radio that now read nothing but blank glass. "They hit us with a localized burst. Must have rolled a coil up on the ridge." Caleb's head lulled. Blood loss fogged his eyes, but fear cleared them. The secondary drives. Maeve lifted the insulated SAT drive pouch from her vest pocket. A faint LED still winked. "Data's intact, but no way to transmit. Not from here." She looked to Jonah. "Hard exfil." Jonah nodded once. The van rode 2 clicks west. A rusted Ford utility truck they'd stashed days earlier, battery shielded under a steel Faraday hood. If it still cranked, its onboard satellite rig could piggyback a packet burst. A slim chance, but chance enough. Caleb grimaced. "I can ride, but not run." Maeve helped him stand. "You won't have to. We load you in and roll." Jonah checked his rifle, but the night vision module was dead. "Optics fried. We're blind." A low growl answered him from Haven. The shepherd stood by the cellar door, tail stiff, head tilted toward the darkness overhead. He turned, walked to Jonah, chest square, eyes bright. Jonah read the stance. "He wants point." Caleb managed a weak chuckle. "He's the only one still running full sensory." "Oh." Haven padded to the hatch, looked back. The message was clear. "Follow." Jonah unbarred the trap carefully. Maeve grabbed a mechanical lantern, one of the old crank dynamo models, and spun it until a dim yellow cone bloomed. They climbed. Upstairs. Smoke clung thick. The flare had burned out, leaving the air acrid. Moonlight speared through bullet holes in the shutters. Outside silence, but the tense kind before doors blow inward. Jonah nudged Haven's flank. "South window, clear a path." Haven trotted ahead, ears swiveling. He paused at the door Maeve had reinforced with a steel brace, sniffed once, then moved on, choosing the kitchen exit instead. He nudged the cracked frame. Jonah eased it open, muzzle first, scanning. Snow drifted across the porch, luminous under cold starlight. The trees whispered empty of enemy shapes. Haven dropped to the snow, nose low, started west. Jonah helped Caleb down the steps. Maeve followed, closing the door behind them. They moved single file through knee-deep powder, lantern doused, trusting pale sky and Haven's ghost-quiet tread. The dog set a diagonal course, avoiding sensor lines he'd scented earlier, threading between pines scarred by shrapnel. More than once he paused, head tilting, reading wind. Each time he altered course a meter or two before Jonah spotted tripwire glinting under moon. 50 yards in, a faint clatter of gear far behind Ellis's team breaching the lodge. A muffled shout, "Clear the basement!" Then an explosion thermite catching on propane. Orange bloom lit the trees. Heat rolled past their backs. Haven never broke stride. Caleb's knees buckled. Maeve tightened her grip. "Stay with me," she hissed. He gritted teeth. "Just keep him moving." 200 yards, Haven altered vector again. Nose lifted. Ahead, the moon broke through clouds, revealing an old logging track half buried in drifts. The Ford sat under a cloak of white, windows frosted. Haven circled once, no scent of intruders, then sat, as if to say, "Doors are clear." Jonah wrenched open the driver's side. Maeve slid Caleb across the bench seat, buckled him, then vaulted to passenger. Haven jumped into the cargo bay, turning to face the forest mouth like a gun emplacement. Jonah popped the hood, checked the battery cage, Faraday shield intact. He climbed in, twisted the key. Nothing. He cursed, opened glove box, yanked a hand crank starter. 3 revolutions still dead. Haven's growl rumbled. New scent on wind pursuit. 4th crank. Engine coughed. 5th roared to life. Lights flickering. Jonah jammed into gear. Tires spun, caught, lurched. The truck groaned onto the track as flames behind them climbed the lodge roof, a pyre against night. Maeve powered the roof antenna, praying its circuits had survived. LEDs blinked green they had. She plugged the sat drive, keyed the burst routine. A spinning circle. Searching handshake. She exhaled trembling breath. Gunfire cracked behind, they'd been spotted. Rounds pinged tailgate. Haven snarled, braced against sidewall, eyes flaming. Jonah tore through a snowbank. The truck fishtailed, then straightened down the slope toward the valley cut, where satellite windows still kissed the horizon. Maeve stared at progress bar. Link acquired. 10 seconds, she whispered. Caleb's head lolled. He forced a smile. Told you, he'd lead us out. Haven turned from the rear hatch, met Caleb's gaze just for a beat. In his eyes, burned purpose, not obedience. Jonah punched accelerator. The truck lunged onto the frozen creek bed where signal climbed strongest. Maeve hit send. Flare of green across the router screen packet away. At the rear, Haven stood sentinel, wind whipping his ears, as if daring the dark to follow. Behind them, the lodge collapsed in sparks, Ellis's plan burning to ash. Ahead, on a thin thread of uplink, Truth sprinted into orbit, carried by a dog who once had no name and chose his own war. Wind howled through Samson's Basin as dawn teased the tree line. In that fragile hour, the team moved. 3 squads advanced, Alpha through the creek bed, Bravo between firs, Charlie up the ridge. The ruined lodge still smoked, but 50 yards south, Maeve's generator shed hummed a stubborn heartbeat. In the Ford utility van, Caleb clutched the satellite tablet, uploading Project Helix's secrets packet by packet. 6%, Maeve muttered, oil on her knuckles, eyes flicking to the status bar like a diver watching for air. Downhill, Jonah waited with rifle and shepherd. Haven stood beside him, breath short and sharp. Alpha Team 2 hostiles 11 o'clock, Jonah whispered. No visual on Tango 3. Copy, Maeve's voice crackled. Bravo's closing. Inside the van, Caleb's blood soaked his side. 12%. Keep them off us. Snow shimmered around Alpha's boots, then Haven moved. Silent as breath, he slipped downhill. 2 guards fell, 1 silencer crushed in his jaws. The other dropped with a pop and a cry. Haven vanished. Jonah rose, fired. Alpha broke. At the shed, Maeve fired bursts through the window. Caleb barked in her ear. Packet loss at 22%. She cursed. Bullets thudded around her. Holding the line. Another figure neared the generator's tank. Maeve's mag went dry. "Jonah, I'm empty." No reply. Just Haven, barreling through snow, colliding with the sapper. Muzzle flared skyward. Then silence. Caleb exhaled. 41%. On the ridge, Jonah spotted new threats, 3 figures ghosting above. He signaled Haven. Man and dog split. Jonah flanked right. Haven climbed. The first enemy fell under his weight. Jonah's rifle whispered. All 3 down. "Generator taking rounds," Maeve called. "Ridge clear. Moving." Inside the van, the signal faltered. "Voltage spike," Caleb yelled. Maeve crawled under fire to fix the fuse. Haven stood guard, barking thunder. The generator steadied. 73%. She met Haven's eyes. Good boy. He didn't wag, just watched the trees. Inside the van, Caleb whispered, "Faster, please." The bar read, 74% transmission stalled. Terrain interference. "Signal shadow," he muttered. "Ridge 13, Jonah said. 400 vertical. I'll hold the line." "No," Maeve said, tossing her gear in the driver's seat. "I'm going." You roll, we lose everything," Jonah growled. "And if we stay still?" "Imp. Mortar, we lose it anyway." A bark cut through tension. Haven stood by the door, then nudged the handle. Decision made. "You take him," Jonah said. "Shotgun, eyes forward." Maeve slammed the door, floored the gas. Jonah watched the taillights vanish. Inside, Haven braced against the dash. Caleb groaned. "How bad?" Maeve whispered. "We climb." The road narrowed. Behind them, Ellis's men seized the ruins. 76. 2 bars, Caleb panted. Then, RPG. Too late to dodge. The blast shook the road. Haven threw his weight against the van, kept it upright. Maeve gunned the engine onto an old spur. Trees clawed the paint. They burst over, the lip sky opened. Signal reacquired. 85%, Caleb cried. Maeve parked. Haven stared downslope. She handed him the rifle sling. "Guard." Shots rang out. 1 man fell. Haven barked. Thunderous. T, 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 T. Transmission verified. Maeve snapped the drive in half. "We did it." Haven wagged once, still watching the path. Suddenly, the final descent. "Road's clear." Maeve lied. "But," Haven growled. Up ahead, spike strip, half buried under snow. Military grade. Maeve froze too close to brake, too far to coast. Haven met her eyes, then leapt through the broken window. He ran, veering left, bit through the first cable, then the second. Sparks popped. The strip didn't spring, but lay teeth up. Maeve tried to swerve, but too late. Haven dove onto the strip, jaws locking on its spine. He wrenched it off-axis just enough. The van scraped past rubber screeching. For a second. Relief. Then Maeve glanced back. Haven's hind leg caught pinned by metal. His yelp cut like a knife. She slammed the brake. Caleb screamed, "Don't stop!" But she already had. Bullets zipped past as she opened the door. Caleb crawled forward. "We can't free it under fire," Ellis's voice boomed. "Hand over the drive." Maeve gritted her teeth. Caleb tossed her a shovel. She dug. Metal shrieked. Haven pulled free at last. Ellis's men charged. Caleb fired. 1 fell. "Go!" he shouted. Haven limped into the van, blood trailing. Maeve and Caleb followed. Bullets shattered the lights. Maeve floored it. Haven collapsed on the floorboard. "You saved us," she whispered. Shells whined past. Maeve gripped the wheel. "Let's go get Jonah." Behind them, spike strip, blood, empty casings. Ahead, sunlight, and the next fight. Snow clung to the wound on Haven's flank, numbing it as he pushed through drifts along the logging road. 1 hind leg dragged behind, breath steaming in bursts. Behind him, the sound of the Ford had faded. Maeve and Caleb were gone. That had been the plan. Draw the hunters away. But the forest wasn't silent. Boots crunched nearby. Haven limped to a stand of spruce, blood dotting the snow like a beacon. He crouched behind a trunk, body coiled despite the pain. Voices drifted 3, maybe 4 men. 1 cold, familiar. Ellis. 2 riflemen passed first. Haven waited. Then Ellis appeared confident, unreadable, rifle at his side. The shepherd stepped from the shadows. Ellis stopped, sensing more than seeing. "Still breathing, Unit 4?" he sneered. "I wrote your death order myself." The soldiers raised their rifles. Haven growled, ears back. Ellis stepped closer. "Your handler's gone. Your friends ran. And you? You're bleeding out." He raised a sidearm. "Let's finish the paperwork." Haven barked a defiant, final sound and lunged. The shot grazed his shoulder, but Haven crashed into Ellis. They fell. The pistol flew. Fists pummeled ribs. A boot struck the wound. Haven clamped on Ellis's arm. Bone creaked. A soldier moved in, rifle butt raised. Haven spun, bit through glove and skin. Another shot missed wide. Ellis scrambled for the pistol. "Enough," he barked, trembling hand leveling the gun. Haven stood bloodied, defiant. "Lee down," Ellis ordered. Haven growled low, 1 step forward. A rifle crack shattered dawn. Ellis jerked, chest plate blooming red. A second shot his thigh. He collapsed. Jonah stood above, rifle still warm. Soldiers turned, 1 fell, the other fled. Haven lunged again, Ellis reaching for the pistol. Too slow. Haven pinned him, jaws inches from his throat. The van skidded to a stop. Maeve leaned out, rifle drawn. Jonah descended. "Call him off?" Maeve stared at Ellis. His choice. Haven growled, then backed off. Ellis's eyes closed, expecting death. But it didn't come. Jonah zip-tied his wrists. End of the hunt. Caleb slumped in the doorway. He finished it. Without killing. Maeve knelt beside Haven. "Not just a dog," she whispered. "A soldier." Then the hiss of fire split the moment. One of Ellis's men had thrown thermite. It ignited a spruce flames, leaping branch to branch, riding the wind. Maeve dragged Haven behind a rock. Sparks swirled. Below, Ellis freed from Jonah in the chaos, crouched by a corpse, pistol in hand again. "Ellis loose," Maeve shouted. Shots cracked. Jonah ducked. Caleb returned fire, but Ellis vanished into smoke. Flames erupted, a wall of fire separating Ellis from the team. He laughed through the smoke, bloodied but wild. "You think a dog and 3 broken soldiers end me?" He used the blaze as cover, gun raised. Maeve tried to flank, but wind turned the fire sideways, boxing them in. Caleb spotted him, aimed, but his arms trembled. He couldn't steady the shot. Ellis fired first. Caleb spun to the snow, shoulder torn again. Jonah shouted, pinned by gunfire from Ellis's last rifleman. Ellis stepped toward Caleb for the kill. Haven moved. His body coiled. No command, no leash, just resolve. He sprinted. Flames licked the snow ahead. Haven didn't stop. He leapt, fire curling his belly. Ellis turned too late. Haven struck his chest like a hammer. The pistol fired, scorching his shoulder, but Haven drove them both into the snow. Teeth found Ellis's arm bone cracked. The pistol rose. Haven bit the barrel, yanked, sent it flying into fire. Ellis reached for his knife. Haven slammed him again, ripped the throat mic free. Blood sprayed across the snow. Ellis gasped. "They'll always replace him." The sentence died in Haven's jaws. Silence fell. Maeve and Jonah appeared through smoke. Haven stood over the body, chest heaving, flames dancing in his eyes. Maeve tended Caleb. "Alive," she said, barely believing it. Jonah touched Haven's cheek. "Good boy." Snow began to fall again, soft, covering the fire's edge, covering the blood. Haven limped back to Maeve's side, eyes steady. The hunt was over, but the war had ended on his terms. Silence swallowed the mountain, broken only by distant gunfire as Jonah finally dropped the last rifleman. Maeve scrambled through smoke, choking, rifle ready, then froze at the sight. Haven standing over Ellis's limp body, chest heaving, flames reflecting in his eyes. Jonah limped up, rifle sagging. He met Maeve's gaze, no words. The fire line crackled, but its advance slowed now, heat struggling against fresh snow. Maeve shouldered her carbine, moved to Caleb alive, barely pressure on his new wound. Haven stepped away from Ellis, limped toward Jonah. Blood dripped from jaws. Patches of fur on his belly smoldered but did not flame. Jonah knelt, fingers trembling, touching the dog's cheek. "Good boy," he whispered, voice breaking. No distant rifle cracked. No new shadows moved. The hunt was over. Caleb managed a weak laugh, wet with blood. War finished what it started, he murmured. Maeve gripped his hand, tears carving clean lines through soot on her cheeks. Snowflakes began to fall again, gentle, soft, extinguishing the outer tongues of flame. Haven huffed, sinking onto haunches beside Jonah, gazed sweeping forest one final time. The growl had died, replaced by a vast, exhausted quiet. In the steam rising from cooling blood, the mountain exhaled truth paid for in embers and teeth. Dawn climbed higher, light washing away the last of the shadows. Snow kept falling even after the gun smoke thinned, as though the mountain itself insisted on covering every ugly thing with a white benediction. Flames from the dying fire line hissed beneath the new powder, shrinking to black scarred logs that steamed like half-remembered nightmares. The bodies of Ellis's men lay scattered in crimson constellations, already turning pink under the fresh flakes. Jonah limped along the perimeter, rifle lowered but watchful, confirming no pulse, no breath, no hidden radio clicks. Each confirmation loosened a knot in his spine. Maeve knelt over a makeshift litter beside the van, working fresh gauze across Caleb's second wound through and through, high on the shoulder. She moved with calm speed. Morphine ampule, compression pad, tape. Her gloves soaked dark, but her hands never shook. Caleb fought the tremors of shock, gritting his teeth as she cinched the bandage tight. "Still breathing," he joked, voice a thready rasp. Maeve offered the faintest smile. "Annoyingly." He looked past her to the center of the clearing, where Haven rested. "And him?" She turned. Haven lay in a shallow snow hollow beside Ellis's lifeless form, chest rising slow and uneven. His flank wound bled again, seared fur charred at the edges where fire had kissed skin. But the eyes were distant, searching some horizon no human could see, as though waiting for the next order that would never come. Jonah completed his circuit, shouldered the rifle, and trudged to Maeve and Caleb. "Area's clear. No more transmit chatter on the dead man's radio." He exhaled frost. "It's over." Caleb shook his head gently. "Not until we bring him back." He pushed off the litter, ignoring Maeve's protest, and staggered through knee-deep snow toward the dog. Each step throbbed through his wounded shoulder. Each exhale puffed pink vapor where fresh stitches had already soaked through. He stopped an arm's reach from Haven. The shepherd's head lifted slow, cautious. Ears twitched, then settled. No growl, no bark, simply recognition. Caleb dropped to his knees, wincing. Snow seeped into the fabric of his pants, but the cold felt distant, muffled by morphine and adrenaline. He reached out, palm up, inches from Haven's muzzle. "Hey," he whispered, voice cracked from smoke and shouting. "You came home." The words drifted away like breath. Haven's amber eyes flicked to Caleb's outstretched hand, then to the wound blooming red beneath Caleb's sleeve, and back again as if weighing which pain mattered more. Caleb waited. It had been what? 2 weeks since that night in the forest outpost, when a dying stranger begged for help and a betrayed war dog decided not to look away. 2 weeks of storms, blood, and smoked gunmetal dawns. But the true distance measured between them stretched across 6 years of broken oaths. Haven shifted forward, the movement stiff. Snow parted under his paws. He lowered his head, sniffed Caleb's palm. The dog's whiskers brushed skin coarse. Trembling, Caleb held breath, feeling each vibration drift up his arm to settle behind his ribs. Then, slowly, Haven nudged Caleb's hand aside and leaned his scarred ear ragged from shrapnel, frostbite, and Ellis's last punch against Caleb's fingers. It was not surrender. It was permission. Caleb's throat tightened. He raised his other hand careful, slow, and, just once, ran his fingertips along the torn edge of ear and down the coarse fur behind. Beneath that touch, Haven released a low exhale, eyes half closing. A sound, not quite a whine, not quite a sigh, something like relief. Wind rustled the treetops. A jay gave a startled cry in the distance. Otherwise, the mountain held its breath, bearing witness. Jonah watched from meters away, quiet as snowfall. In his memory of battlefields, this was the only sound that ever meant the fight was truly finished when a dog finally allowed touch without orders. Maeve approached, kneeling opposite Caleb. She pressed 2 fingers to Haven's flank wound, checking blood flow. "We'll need to flush and stitch," she murmured. Haven didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on Caleb. Maeve nodded, impressed.
You trust him more than morphine, hmm?
Caleb smiled faintly, tears cracking frost on his lashes. Morphine never pulled anyone out of a blizzard. He stroked the dog's neck once more, fingers brushing the thermal-lined vest. He was never supposed to come back. Jonah sank to a crouch. He did, and so did we. Behind them, the generator in the van thumped, still feeding dribbles of power into the SAT tablet's antenna. Caleb looked over, worry spiking. Maeve shook her head. Uploads are safe. Redundancy verified. She glanced toward Ellis's body. His last failsafe died with him. Jonah unslung his pack, rummaged for veterinary field sutures loot from Sampson's bunker. Let's patch our partner, he said. Caleb eased Haven onto his uninjured side. The dog didn't resist. He kept watching Caleb, as if each heartbeat asked, "What now?" Caleb answered with both hands cupping Haven's powerful head. "Now," he whispered, "we go home, wherever that is." Maeve prepped saline. Jonah threaded needle. Snowflakes settled on Haven's fur, on Caleb's hair, on Ellis's still chest-indifferent confetti, marking the end of one kind of war. Jonah began stitching. Haven winced once, but Caleb's grip steadied him. Maeve cleaned the scorch marks along belly and rib cage, humming some forgotten lullaby from desert deployments. The melody tangled with wind, with soft crackle from the last embers behind them, with the silent rumble in Haven's throat, contentment masquerading as thunder. When the final stitch tied off, Jonah sat back, flexing stiff fingers. Good as battlefield. Good. Maeve splinted her own burned palm, then helped Caleb stand. He swayed. Haven rose too, pressing flank to his hip, a living crutch. Caleb smiled. Thought you were done carrying people. Aye. Haven chuffed. Short and warm, plume of steam ghosting the air. Jonah scanned the horizon one last time. No silhouettes, no muzzle flashes, just sun climbing above distant peaks, gilding smoke trails like ribbons. He slung rifle, turned toward the mountain road. Time to find a vet, he said, and a reporter who owes us front-page real estate. Maeve gathered gear, nodding. Caleb took one step, hissed, steadied. Haven matched pace, tail a low wag. Together they limped toward the van past Ellis, past the fireline scar, into the hush of a new day. Halfway there, Haven paused. He threw his head back and let out a single, resonant howl, long, rising, echoing off every ridge. Not grief, not warning. A proclamation. The lost had found voice, and the mountain would remember. Caleb shivered as the sound washed through him. "Welcome home," he murmured. Haven lowered his head, brushed Caleb's fingertips with that scarred ear once more, then resumed the walk, snow crunching under paws that finally pointed forward. 3 weeks had passed since the fire died out on that frozen ridge, since the last scream from Ellis's team echoed into nothing, since Haven's howl broke a silence even bullets couldn't touch. And now, in a place with microphones instead of rifles and walls of polished oak instead of trees and snow, the war had found new form. Capitol Hill was never built for ghosts, but that morning, it held them anyway. A black and white photo lit the projection screen behind the Senate subcommittee bench. A young German shepherd with eyes too alert, too calculating. Beneath the photo ran a caption RAE 17, designated Haven, and below that a line of faded ink. Subject reassigned to protocol, final handling, non-recoverable. Adrian Walsh's voice, clear and firm, filled the chamber through a pre-recorded narration. They were trained for silence, raised without names, modified without consent, disposed of like defective machinery. But these dogs, they remembered. One of them survived, long enough to come back. And the humans who tried to bury them? This time, it's their turn to be seen. Her article had gone live 10 days ago, Dogs of War, Project Helix uncovered, and it had detonated like truth wrapped in gunpowder. Not just headlines, not just outrage. A hearing, a federal investigation, whispers of charges. And for the first time, a name, Project Helix, said aloud under oath. Caleb Merrick sat at the witness table, pale under courtroom lights. The sling over his left arm was no longer soaked in blood, but the memory remained deep, layered, and stitched like the rest of him. He didn't wear a tie, just a simple charcoal sweater, sleeves rolled to elbows, scars visible, a quiet message. I won't hide anymore. Senator Langford leaned forward. Mr. Merrick, for the record, you designed the neural reinforcement grid used in the Helix program? Yes. Were you aware your technology was being used to suppress emotional memory in canines? Number. Caleb's voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver. The contract specified behavioral assessment and mission analytics. I believe that's what I was building, and when you discovered otherwise, I ran. Langford nodded. You admit to leaking classified documents? I didn't leak. I recovered what the program tried to erase, and I shared them with a journalist when it became clear no one in the chain of command would listen. There was a pause, a long one. Then another senator, face unreadable, asked the question that turned every camera forward. What made you go back? Caleb looked down for a moment. His fingers tapped twice on the table's wood grain, then stopped. A dog, he said quietly. He wasn't supposed to make it out, but he did. And when he found me, I realized he remembered everything, even the people who betrayed him. The chamber was silent. I owed him more than survival, Caleb added. I owed him a name. Maeve watched from the back row, arms crossed, expression unreadable. The bruises had healed. The tendon tear in her wrist was wrapped tight beneath a black jacket sleeve, but her eyes stayed sharp, cut-glass focused. She hadn't said a word to the press. Not when Adrian called. Not when they sent requests for interviews. Not even when they offered payment. Some truths weren't for broadcast. Beside her sat Jonah, in his patched jacket and scuffed boots, his left hand idly resting on the silver buckle of Haven's vest, now empty, folded in his lap. Jonah didn't testify either. He hadn't filed for commendation, hadn't posted a photo. He simply nodded when Caleb asked for help and never left. There were heroes, and there were those who made heroism possible, brick by brick, in silence. They were the latter. Adrian stood by the rotunda window after the session, scribbling notes in the margin of her own article, already thinking ahead. She didn't bother hiding the emotion in her eyes, something between pride and mourning. Caleb approached her as the press started thinning out. You wrote it the way it needed to be written, he said. She nodded. The rest is up to them now. Then, after a pause, and up to you. He gave a half smile. I'm not good at politics. No, she said. But you're finally telling the truth. That's louder. Outside the building, in the wide sweep of concrete and trimmed lawn, Haven sat still near the security barrier. The Capitol dome shimmered faintly behind him. People passed. Some stared. A few slowed down, but no one approached. He didn't wear a leash. He didn't need one. A boy, maybe 6, walked near him, tugging his mother's hand. Mom, he whispered, is he the one from the picture? His mother nodded, crouched and whispered something. Then, gently, the boy stepped forward. Haven watched, but didn't move. The boy reached out. Hi, Haven. The dog blinked slowly. Then, with a breath so light it was nearly wind, he lowered his head, letting the boy's hand brush his fur. Caleb watched from a distance. For once, he didn't feel like hiding. He knelt beside the shepherd when the boy and mother walked away. You okay being seen? He asked. Haven's ears flicked. No bark, no growl. Just a quiet lean into Caleb's leg, the weight of a soldier at rest. Truth hadn't undone what was done, but for the first time, it had been said aloud. And that, perhaps, was where healing could finally begin. The snow had long melted from the ridge by the time Jonah pushed open the new gate. Where once there had been sandbags and motion sensors, now stood a simple wooden arch, hand-carved, sealed against weather, and stained the color of old oak. Above it, etched in metal, the Haven Foundation, for those who were never meant to be forgotten. It was no longer a hideout. It was home. Inside the old lodge, the air smelled of pine wood and sawdust, with the faintest trace of antiseptic. The back walls had been reinforced. 2 of the smaller rooms were turned into kennels spacious, sunlit, with padded flooring and weather-resistant beds. A small surgery room had been added near the east end, its equipment donated by a vet clinic that Maeve once worked with. She stood by the fireplace now, arms dusted with plaster and paint. The lodge had changed, but not too much. The same creaking floorboards still sang beneath her boots. The same rafters held the weight of old storms, but this place no longer felt haunted. The silence here was softer, chosen. Jonah entered quietly behind her, wiping his hands on a cloth, smudged with axle grease. "Generator's clean," he said. "Water lines are holding. Might even get that greenhouse running next month." Maeve smiled faintly. "We're getting there." Outside, in the far clearing, 3 dogs ran too with slightly awkward gaits, one missing a chunk of his left ear, all of them loud and alive. And in the shade beneath the porch, Haven lay still, watching, guarding, as always. But this time, he was not alone. They had named the central room the Hall of Service. On the left wall, a series of plaques hand-carved, each one bearing a name, a date, and a few quiet words. The first was for her, Nova, died free, not forgotten. Beneath the words was a silhouette carved into the grain, a female shepherd mid-sprint, ears forward, tail high, as if she'd never slowed down. Maeve traced the letters that morning, her fingertips gentle, lips not moving, but eyes soft with memory. Nova had only lived 14 months after they pulled her from that ditch, but those months mattered. She mattered. Jonah stood beside her in silence, then reached for the second plaque. This one he'd carved himself, through 3 days of early dawns and 1 night of snow. He mounted it next to Nova's Haven, survived, still fighting. There was no rank, no serial, no code, only truth. That night, the fireplace glowed with slow warmth. Jonah sipped black coffee from a tin mug. Maeve sat on the floor, brushing the coat of a shepherd mix named Dusty Scarred Muzzle, missing a toe, gentle as the wind. Haven lay by the window, head rested on the wooden floor, ears still twitching at distant sounds, but the stiffness in his frame had softened. Since the ridge, since the fire, something in him had shifted, not healed, not completely, but allowed to begin healing. He no longer flinched at the sound of metal doors. He no longer barked at shadows. And last week, for the first time, he had dozed beside Jonah's boots, voluntarily. Maeve looked up. "You think they'll come?" Jonah raised a brow. "Reporters?" She shook her head. "The others, dogs like him, left behind, marked for decommission." Jonah leaned back. "If they're out there, they'll find us." He set the mug down. "They always do." There was a pause, long and quiet. Outside, the wind rustled through the treetops. Then a faint woof from the kennels, one of the new arrivals stirring in sleep. Maeve stood, walked to the entry wall. On a large wooden board, a new map was pinned, marked with red thumbtacks, locations of other known drop points, euthanasia centers once linked to Helix, shelters flagged in Caleb's recovered data. Above it, a simple phrase burned into the wood: "Every life reclaimed is a war undone." Haven rose and padded to her side, tail low but calm. He looked at the map, then at Maeve. She didn't need him to speak. She reached down, ran a hand along the scar above his shoulder. "You kept going," she murmured. "So will we." He leaned into the touch just enough to be felt. Out back, the sky had turned copper blue, a faint mist curling above the tree line. The land was still. But it no longer felt like waiting. There was movement inside these walls, footsteps that no longer crept, wounds that no longer bled. At dawn, Maeve and Jonah installed the last plaque, not for a dog this time, but for a man. Samson Reed, built to hide, rebuilt to heal. No one ever found out what Ellis did to him, or how long he fought back before the end, but the lodge had been his once, a place where maps were burned, ghosts laid to rest. It was only right his name stood here now, not as a casualty, but as a cornerstone. Jonah brushed snow off the edge of the plaque, then looked out toward the forest. "We're gonna need more room," he said quietly. Maeve didn't answer. She just kept building. The girl arrived just after first light. No car, no suitcase. Just a jacket too big for her frame and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to blink. She didn't say her name, didn't need to. Maeve had seen the type before kids shuffled through too many systems, spoken about but rarely to. Her file had said war refugee, but that wasn't the whole truth. The war was over. It just hadn't ended inside her yet. They gave her the room closest to the southern tree line, quiet, with an old patchwork quilt folded on the edge of the bed. She didn't unpack. She didn't eat much either. For 2 days, she wandered the perimeter like a shadow, always watching, never joining. Her hands were small, but her silence was enormous. No one pushed. Because some wounds don't break open. They just settle into the bones. On the third day, it snowed. Thick flakes spiraled down from a silver sky, softening every edge. Maeve was fixing the feeder troughs outside when Jonah called her from the porch. He didn't speak, just tilted his head toward the lodge's front hallway. She was there, the girl, standing still, barely breathing, eyes fixed ahead, not on the people, but on the figure lying by the stone hearth. Haven. He'd been asleep, chin resting on his front paws, tail curled in. But something shifted in the room when she stepped closer, like the air had drawn tighter. Alert, but not afraid. She paused only once, then kept walking. One foot, then the next, until she was close enough to see the pale seams of scar tissue beneath Haven's dark fur. Her eyes didn't flinch, not at the notched ear, not at the rough skin near his flank. She just sat, cross-legged, back straight, hands folded in her lap. Haven opened one eye, watched her, didn't move. The minutes passed like a snowfall quiet, accumulating slowly. Then, almost imperceptibly, the girl extended her hand. It trembled, just a little, but not from cold. She didn't speak. Her fingers stayed open, palm up, not coaxing, not demanding, just there. Haven lifted his head. The room held its breath. And then wordlessly, without command or cue, he rose, walked toward her. No sound but the shift of his weight and the faint creak of the floorboard beneath his paw. He stopped an arm's length away and looked at her, longer than most people can bear. But she didn't look away. So he closed the distance, lowered his head, and gently, deliberately laid his scarred muzzle into her open hand. Maeve exhaled through her nose quietly. Jonah rubbed at his jaw, eyes misted but unblinking. No one spoke. They knew better. This was a language older than words. Later, Maeve would learn the girl's name was Amira. She'd been born in a village with no name on most maps, where drones hummed louder than lullabies. Her father was a translator, her mother a teacher, both gone. She had survived under rubble for 19 hours once. She didn't remember the sound of the blast, just the silence after. Since then, she hadn't spoken. Not once. Therapists called it selective mutism. Doctors said trauma. But Haven didn't need to name it. He knew it. That night, Amira stayed in the main lodge long after the others had gone. Maeve left a cup of chamomile tea by the fire, but didn't disturb her. She came back later to find it untouched, but cold now, not forgotten. The mug had been turned slightly toward the flames. Amira was asleep beside Haven, curled gently against his side. His head rested across her knees, breath rising slow and steady. For the first time in many years, she had fallen asleep without being told. In the weeks that followed, she still didn't speak, but she listened. She helped feed the younger dogs. She never touched their collars, but sat with them, sometimes humming very softly, just enough for the closest dogs to tilt their heads. One afternoon, Maeve found her outside, sketching. The paper was rough, the pencil nearly worn through, but the image was unmistakable. Haven, not as he was, but as he stood that morning when he crossed the floor toward her eyes, sharp, posture sure, the muzzle in her hand. She'd drawn his scars, too. But they didn't look ugly. They looked earned. They say healing isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's a paw print in snow beside your own. Sometimes, it's knowing when to sit quietly with someone until they can breathe again. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's one war dog, weary and wounded, seeing a child the world forgot, and choosing again to stay. No medals, no commands, just one more mission. And this time, it began with the opening of a hand. Sometimes, the quietest bonds are the ones that hold us together the strongest. A dog doesn't need words to say, "I'm here," or "I'll stay." Especially a German shepherd loyal to a fault, wise beyond training, and always watching, even when we don't notice. If you've ever loved a dog, really loved one, you know it's not just about walks or food bowls. It's the way they wait for your return, the soft thump of a tail when you're hurting, the quiet comfort of knowing someone sees all of you and stays. If this story stirred something in you, maybe it's time to deepen that connection with your own four-legged companion. I found a simple resource that offers gentle ways to build trust. especially with older or rescued dogs. It's not flashy, just thoughtful and kind. I'll leave the link here, in case it finds the right heart. Take a look if it feels right, or just sit with your dog a little longer tonight. Sometimes, that's all the healing we need.